Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Again, welcome back after the lunch break. And in this session, we have again three speakers, and the first session will be now. The first speaker is Professor Saudamini Das. Professor Saudamini Das works at Institute of Economic Growth, and she's a very much familiar face in the field of environmental economics. People who work in environment and climate change and natural resources related issues must be very much familiar with her work. And that she has taken up very good projects, funded by different international agencies, and she has very good publications, particularly different natural disasters and like cyclone, super cyclone, and then heat wave and natural disasters overall. So we'll be listening from her basically that what all issues can be taken up for research in the field of environment and natural resource management. So with this, I welcome Professor Saudamini Das. Again, she is also a member of our Odisha Economics Association. And so, Ma'am, it's over to you now. Yeah, so as we have told that it will be of 1 hour, and then about 30 to 35 minutes you can take for presentation, and then we can have discussion. Yeah, so floor is now yours.
Thank you, Amarendra. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to give me this chance. I think 1 month before, I also had a session in the Center for Social Development, Hyderabad. So I also was trying to speak on a similar topic. So the presentation that I'm going to give today is also, a combined one, though I have added few slides, but this is more or less, trying to, give some guidance how exactly to go about writing a proposal, so that writing the thesis or doing the thesis becomes an easy work. If you do some hard work at the beginning, then, your thesis becomes easy, and you also try to get good publications out of it. So that is what I'm going to motivate the participants on this one, how exactly to develop the proposal and how much of hard work should get into it at the beginning itself. And what are the areas, there if they try to work, they're going to get good mileage over the course of their career. So that's what I'm going to see. And as Dr. Amandra had, advised me, I have kept my presentation to areas related to environment, natural resource management, and climate change. So I'll try to give you some topics in those areas, and also we'll try to introduce some of the methodologies. But more or less, this is on a very general issue that I'm going to talk to you today. Sorry, I think that is it. Yes. So now, let me just tell you what are some of the frontline areas. Frontline areas that you can, think of, just to beginning to motivate you. Like in case of environment and natural resource management, some of these issues maybe I'll also discuss later on. Like one is the sustainable use of a natural resource, which is a big thing at the moment, because we have the natural resource quality going down, and almost every government, at least this is one issue that is in globally as well as in India, are very critical. Whether you talk about soil, water, air, or any other things. So the natural resource base of the country is eroding because of some of the wrong technologies that we have been using. So how do you, ensure sustainable use of the natural resources? So this is one area that, people can really do some good work. So here, conservation versus developmental use. Like in economics, we say weak versus strong sustainability. So this is one issue which has really not received a lot of attention from the researchers, from the young researchers. So if people try to work on these issues at a regional scale, Globally, many American economies are trying to do this, or European economies are trying to, seek work on weak and strong sustainability at the global scale. But at a regional scale, this has really not been worked on. So if people can try to see how well the natural capital is sustainable to human capital or man-made capital, and to what degree we can, compromise developing or taking away our natural capital, and if our total economic well-being is being reduced or not being reduced, that is one issue that students can really try to research at the regional scale. And this is really going to have a good policy implication and motivate policy making at the local scale. Second is the ecosystem service assessment, natural versus regenerated systems. Like Government of India, government of all the state governments, they are trying to regenerate forest. So what type of forest they are regenerating, whether that regenerated forest are providing similar services like in natural forest or not. So what are the different ecosystem services you expect from the forest, whether the regenerated forest are giving that or not. Similarly, native versus exotic. So, earlier, a lot of the forest or the forest cover enhancement was, taken into account, using the fast growing trees. The fast growing trees are really not native trees. Native trees usually grow slow, but they provide lot many benefits compared to exotics. Exotics, they grow fast, but they don't provide any ecosystem service. So if you get a chance, if you try to make a comparison between native versus exotic in terms of ecosystem service, provision of ecosystem services, and whether the local community is being benefited by this forest type or not, that also is another area that can provide or give good policy guidance. Then non-market valuation, coming about the technique, though people are working on contingent valuation and other non-market valuation where you do not take the preference, you try to elicit the preference of the people indirectly. So a little bit I can talk to you when I come to the methodology section. So these are some of these techniques which are really not being used much in Indian context. So you can also try to do that. Then trading for pollution abatement. Nowadays also people are trying to see whether you can trade in water quality, like you have trading in carbon trading, similar for water quality trading, for emission trading, you have different type of system. So if those issues also can be taken up. Watershed, there's a lot of investment happening in the watersheds. If you can take few watersheds and try to see whether the watershed rejuvenation is really helping the local community or not. Similarly, ecological farming. This is another technique where every government is trying to go for ecological farming so that soil quality is maintained. Good quality of food grain is produced, whether this is economically viable, ecologically viable or not. But economical viability has really not been taken into account, not been studied. So this is also another area that you can try to study in the environment and natural resource management field. Coming to climate change, I think there are many issues, but let me just highlight. One is the loss and damage, how much climate change is causing damage, loss and damage to different sectors. All the sectoral issues, health, agriculture, maybe industry, services sector. So this is one area that you can do some good research. Insurance, how much of the loss and damage can be, can be recovered through insurance. So insurance take up and how the insurance coverage can be expanded, and why insurance in a particular area is not being taken up. What are the factors inhibiting the uptake of the insurance scheme? Nature-based adaptation. This is again another high priority policy area globally also. That if you want to adapt to climate change, how can you go for natural techniques or not nature-based adaptation? So like nature-based adaptation has, going for more forest cover or regenerating the forest, or, revitalizing the traditional irrigation system or something, some of these techniques, the tank system. So how, whether, going this natural ways is a good way or is a sustainable way of tackling climate change impact or not. Evaluation of adaptation policies, options, activities. Government is doing so many things. Everywhere you have adaptation projects. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is having so many policies. You can try to evaluate some of those policies and say whether these policies are really good or not. If they're not good, what is going wrong? whether they're good at local scale, but not at the regional scale. There is no scope of upscaling or not. So I think this is also another area that you can do some good research. And INDC, like the government is wanting to reduce the emission, and the state action, what action has been taken up to to fulfill the goals set by the INDC, set by the government of India. So this is also another area. These are some of the frontline areas that you can work on. Okay, but I think ultimately these are my ideas to you. The best topic is that what interests you the most. I will advise all the researchers to go for a topic that is really they are interested in. And whatever topic you take up, if you can do a good work, that is going to give you a good mileage. Okay, so though these are the areas where work will be policy relevant, but I will still strongly advise you to go by your own interest. Okay. So now coming to research proposal, basically we write two types of proposal. One is the research proposal for a thesis, and the other one is research proposal for a research grant, which the second one I'm not going to talk to you. And these two are very, very different. When you try to develop these two, they are a little different from each other, because in case of the thesis, your objective should be to have as many publications as possible, whereas when you develop a research proposal for research grant, that has to be highly focused, one publication, but the study should be so good that whatever result you get should not be questionable at all. So these are the whereas the research proposal for thesis is little broad, has to be very broad and give you the maximum. In case of research proposal for a research grant, it has to be highly focused, and your results should be so good and so unbiased that nobody will question your results. So this is how these two are different from each other. And I'm going to tell you how do you develop a research proposal for a thesis. Now, these are the 7 steps to write a good research proposal. One is that identify the problem. They are the topic selection. So what you should be keeping in mind when you select your topic, I'll give you in the next slide. So this is the step 1. Then reviewing the literature. When you review the literature, your objective should be to find the research gap. You are not reviewing literature to increase your knowledge. Of course, you will be increasing your knowledge, but you should be reviewing everything very, very critically so that you are able to say what is wrong, what they did not do. And you will try to do that so that your study fits into the global literature, and then you can say how your study is an improvement over whatever has been studied before. So review of literature should always be having the objective that you are identifying the research gap of your previous researchers. Okay. Then third is decide research objective, questions, and hypothesis. What you should be keeping in mind when you decide your research objective, questions, and hypothesis, how these 3 are linked to each other, and how best to go for it so that you get maximum output from a research. That is the third point. The fourth point is decide the study area and the design, study design. That means the theoretical framework. What framework you are going to use so that your research is going to be really good one, and you are going to have a good publication out of it. So that is the fourth aspect, study design, the theoretical framework. The next is the study area, decide the sample design and the data collection. How best, whether there is, which area you should study. If you have a research question, what area really suits that particular research question very well. And you should have that the issue should be prevalent in that particular area. Then what should be your sample size? How do you select your sample design? What type of formula you should be using so that you have a representative sample? And you should be able to see which one is your population, what is the size of your population. In an area, not necessarily the total population is your study population. So your study population is those who are affected by the research questions. And from the study population, you should be able to decide your sample size, very representative sample size. How do you go about it? And how do you go about the data collection? Then the next, and how you develop your chapter scheme, processing, analyze the data. And 7th point is broad findings. What exactly will be the broad findings, the policy implications, and the references. So your proposal should basically have these 7 components in it, okay? And you should address each component the best way possible so that most of your work is done. And once your research proposal is accepted, doing your thesis becomes a cakewalk because you have already invested so much into it that the entire framework, the path is clear before you. So now coming to topic selection, what you should be having in mind when you do this, one is that the topic should be doable. Don't take any abstract topic. A doable topic on which you should be able to collect data, you should be able to get some, you should be able to use a good methodology to examine your research questions. So it should be a doable topic. Okay, don't take anything on which that is very difficult to get data, or it's difficult to test your research objectives, etc. Then the topic should also be relevant, okay, socially, academically relevant, not very abstract, outdated. Don't work on outdated work issues. Never take up those, even if they're very good, they're socially relevant, but nobody wants to study outdated issues. So take up an issue which is very, very recent, prevalent, and that has interest of the policymaker as well as your co-researchers. Everybody will be interested to know what exactly he or she is doing. So take up an issue which is very relevant both socially as well as academically. Okay, and any of these things, if you have any doubt, you can have a discussion later on. And it should be, when I said relevant, it should be very, very timely. Maybe the present policy people are talking about that, or this is some issue which is affecting the society. So when you bring out a solution, when you research and provide some answer, then everybody will be interested, locally as well as regionally as well as at the national scale. So you take up a timely issue, then we'll generate, so that this will generate interest. People will read it. If you take an abstract, very outdated issue, nobody is going to read it. Even if you produce a very good thesis, this hardly going to have any readers. Then it also implementable message. When you do your research objective, frame your research objective in such a way that whatever result comes out of it, that can be implemented. So try to give that type of message from your thesis. And it should be, and the best and the most important thing is that your research topic should be very, very general, not very specific. So when you have a general research topic, then you are going to have many publications out of it. At least you should aim to have minimum 3 to 4 publications from your thesis. That is possible when you study a general thing. Like, to give one example, in my PhD, I tried to study mangroves. Suppose mangrove has many issues, mangroves and local community. I just try to study the ecosystem services of mangroves, which is very, very general. But instead of doing that, if I just try to study the mangrove and the local community, or livelihood benefit of the mangroves. So livelihood benefit of the mangroves can be a topic only for a research grant. But for a PhD, ecosystem services of mangrove can be relevant, because when you say ecosystem services of mangrove, it's very, very general. Many things comes under it. So you should try to, when you similarly in climate change, you want to see how nature is helping people to adapt to climate change. So you can say nature-based solution, a case study of this particular region, or maybe the forest cover and climate change adaptation. So when you take a general topic like this, then you can include many issues, many topics, and each topic will have the potential to be published as a separate paper. So make your research topic so general that you can have minimum 3 to 4 publications, good quality publications out of it. If the same issue you try to frame differently and send it to different journal, they will not publish it, because you are trying to over extract your research. So each paper should be different from the other one. So to have that, your topic should be very general, so that you study 4 or 5 different issues which are examined differently, which are analyzed with different set of data, and you also can have very good publications out of it. Okay. Then reviewing the literature. This is something most of our students usually do not do a good job. They try to do a very linear review of literature. Now, what is linear review? He said so, she said so, X said this, Y said this. Don't do this. like you write one paragraph on one paper, another paragraph on another paper. So this is called linear review. Linear review leads you nowhere. So what you do is that you should combine studies and sub-theme, and each sub-theme should be linked to your research objective, because when you're reviewing the literature, you are reviewing the literature for your thesis, for your research objective. So for each objective, you review different type of literature and combine the literature according to sub-theme. And once you study, suppose you have studied 10 papers in one theme. So after that, each sub-theme should have a synthesis paragraph. Try to summarize all the 10 papers in 1 or 2 paragraphs. And then in the third paragraph should be a synthesis where you try to see what exactly is the research gap in all those 10 studies. Combine all the 10 studies into 2 paragraphs. And in the third paragraph, basically their findings. And in the third paragraph, you try to say what is the gap there. And that gap you are going to address. So this is how, when you try to review papers and find the gap and mention that, okay, I am going to do, address these particular gaps in my study. So you are integrated to the broader literature. And whatever you write, people, the new readers are going to like your paper, and even the old researchers who have worked on the similar issues are also going to be interested in your study, because you are trying to address their gap. So see to it that your review of literature is not linear, rather it is integrated. So identify the research gap, highlight how your study will address these gaps and contribute the literature. So this is, and you should be doing it for each of your research objective. So this way you are going to really integrate it and also generate interest among the old researchers as well as the new researchers. So I think this is one also best way to make your study, liked by others. So how do you increase the readership and inquisitiveness of people in your research? That basically depends how do you review the literature and how do you highlight or identify the research gap which you are going to address. Then coming to research objective, research questions and hypotheses. This is again a very important topic over here. The most important part of research are these three. Research objective, RO is research objective, research questions, and hypothesis. These three are linked to each other. Each research objective should be stand-alone topic having potential to be developed as a separate chapter. See to it that research objective, though they're linked to the topic that you have selected, but they're addressing different issues. Okay, each research objective should be a standalone topic, and it should be having the potential to be developed as a separate chapter. Secondly, each research objective should have research questions and hypotheses. And you can put them as research objective 1, then research questions 1.1, research questions 1.2, and similar hypothesis 1.1, hypothesis 1.2. So this way, your study is going to be divided into different sections, and each section has the potential to be published as a separate or as a new paper. Each research objective should be analyzed using different methodology. Your methodology for different objectives should also not be common. You should be using a different methodology, and also try to use a different data set. So in that case, your thesis becomes very broad, and your chapters also are not overlapping with each other, and you can send each chapter as a separate journal article to a good journal. So keep these things in mind, that when you, Amarendra, can I take up questions in between? I think Vishwajit has raised hands.
So no, actually, what you have to, you can take it. So what you can do, participants can start posting questions. Actually, in the past sessions, what you did is the speaker spoke for 35 minutes, and then you took the questions.
So I think you should write down your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A session. So I'll take up those questions later on. Okay.
Yes.
So each research objective should be analyzed using different methodology. And let me here I'm going to give you an example from one of my students who just finished his PhD in Italy University. His research topic was ecological and economic significance of sacred forest of Kutch, Gujarat, and arid biogeographic province. He basically tried to study the sacred groups of Kutch. Okay. So his objective, he had three different objectives, and how those three objectives are different from each other. The objective one was to design a management plan for management of sacred groups. So then he had sub-objectives: evaluate the perception of stakeholders towards conservation of sacred groups in West Coast district. And from this particular objective, then the research questions was, what are the relative importance ranking of stakeholders for management of the sacred group? What are the relative ranking of ecological, economic, and cultural values? Then there was a sub-objective to objective 1, that is 1.2, to evaluate the best management practice for management of sacred groups based on the relative ranking of the stakeholders. So this was the one objective, having different research questions and a different hypothesis. So when he was analyzing these questions, he was using a different data set, different methodology, and one complete paper came out of this particular objective. The second objective was to find the association between the proximity to the sacred group and soil quality. So this was an indicator of the supporting services of the sacred group, which had nothing to do with the objective 1. So this was the second objective. See, accordingly, he had his research questions and hypotheses. The third objective was to value the supporting services from sacred groups by measuring the economic benefit in terms of change in agricultural yield of the farmland in proximity to the sacred group vis-a-vis the ones far off from the sacred groups. And the third objective has different research questions and different hypotheses. So this way, when he did the thesis, he had three objectives, and these three objectives were separate from each other. And what he did, he tried to analyze the three using different methodology and different data sets. At the end of the day, he was having three good, substantially good papers, which are published in three different journals. So before his thesis was clear, he had three publications and he had three good presentations in different conferences. So, and then nobody questioned, because each topic, each paper was different from the other one. So this is what I think every researcher should try to do, that your objectives should be separate, and each objective has a potential to be developed as a full paper. So now, study design, this is the theoretical framework, theoretical approach to the analysis. This is empirical method that you are going to use. And also with the empirical method, you should try to develop a data matrix. So that also makes your research very easy in the future. Data matrix for each of the objective or hypothesis to be tested. So like in the previous case, the first research question of my student was analytical hierarchy method. This was his research methodology to find out the management plan. To do the second objective of soil quality and closeness to the sacred group, he used soil scientific sample test. So he used a scientific method to find out what type of soil parameters are found in abundance in the farmland which are closer to the sacred group compared to the ones which are far off. And for the research question 3, he used a non-market valuation method, and he used a production function approach. And with the production function approach, he tried to compare the cost of production in the farmland which are closer to the sacred group compared to the farmland which are far off from the sacred group. As you can see here, there is no overlap of the technique, and also data used, variables to be used are very separate for each of these questions, research questions. Empirical method, this was the research design. Empirical method was a probit for the first one, linear regression for the second one, and instrumental variable regression for the third one. So again, there is no overlap, and the data sources were also different. For the first one, he used the stakeholder, FGD of the stakeholder and their perception. Then for the second one, he did a scientific survey, and for the third one, he did a household survey. So though he also spent 2.5 years in doing his thesis, but he did his thesis in such a way that at the end of 3 years, he has 3 good publications, 3 good presentations, and the thesis was, successful or cleared very smoothly. So this is what I think you all need to keep in mind, that how you develop your research questions and your methodology, takes maybe to start with, you would be spending a lot of time, but this makes your life very, very easy in future in doing your thesis. Okay, then study area, sample design and data collection. Let me spend little time on this. When you decide your study area, highlight those features of the study area which are linked to your research. Provide a good map. data sources, secondary or primary. If you are using secondary data, then nothing like it. That's very easy. But usually when you have primary data, that also adds some new dimension to your research. So if primary, sampling framework, sample size, convince that it is representative of the population, survey design, questionnaire development, and final survey. These are the things you need to keep in mind, and also write few lines in your thesis proposal so that the examiner knows that, okay, you are very clear about what you exactly want to do, and you are also having very good scientific knowledge, and there is nobody will have a doubt that you can produce a good research thesis. Okay. So like this is the sampling framework formula that we use when you go for a primary survey. I think I suppose many of you would be familiar with this formula, where small n stands for the sample size, and that should really be carefully decided, keeping the parameters in mind. And in these parameters, P and Q. P is the main parameter, which is the population parameter. So that is what is the sample proportion or the prevalence of the problem that you really need to carefully decide, so that you have a good representative sample for your study. So if there are any doubt that we can come back to this later on. Okay. Then chapter scheme, I think as I had already told you, like in your thing, introduction, review of literature, objective, methodology and data, study area, results and conclusion. This is what will be a chapter scheme. But when you, depending on the methodology, you can add those methods, the research objective and the chapters accordingly. Okay, introduction, it should give you the study background. Review of literature, I've already told you, research objective, study area, objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, and broad conclusion. This is the framework for your proposal. But this objective 1, 2, and 3, these 3 will be your main chapters, because study area will be common to all the 3. Objective and methodology are already there. Okay, so these 3 will be the main areas or main chapters that you can develop as your good papers. So now when you put down your broad findings or policy implications, so just try to see the expected result, which policy sector can be benefited by this. I think it is really makes sense to identify the sector or the policy sector which is going to use your study. That makes your study very attractive. Describe if there are any policy gap and how your study findings can help address those gaps. Results should be summarized in non-technical language. Here you should do your research very technically. When it comes to putting down or your conclusion or your broad findings, that should be as non-technical as possible, because everybody will like to read that. Non-technical people will be reading that. So then follow one referencing style. So guide and how do you write a good thesis? Well, contextualize your study to broad literature, summarize studies as per your objectives so that you use them straight away in publication. Follow different analytical framework for different chapters. Estimate multiple models, providing the rigor of your empirical analysis and robust result. Use non-technical language in conclusion, policy implication chapter. Always keep in mind that thesis is not only for publication as a book, but also for a good journal publications. So this is what makes your thesis attractive. Be careful about plagiarism. Anyway, anybody has to do the test now. Use proper language, get edited by the experts. I think these are the fine points that you should be keeping in mind when you write a good proposal, and that can develop as a good thesis, and that will give you good publications and a good standing as a researcher. Okay. So now, as I've already introduced to some of these areas, as I said before, I think any interesting area is the one that really interests you. Right now, natural farming or ecological farming is the talk of the day. If you can study this one, natural farming, we call it zero cost agriculture, zero budget agriculture, natural farming, ecological farming. People call it in different way, and then they say this farming can easily adapt to climate change because of the climate change rate. This is being promoted, at least in India, this is being promoted in such a large scale. If you can do a study on this one, and also try to link natural farming to food security, economic and ecological viability. Whether experts say natural farming is ecologically viable, whether it is economic viable or not, because so far there are economists, at least, they haven't studied much of it. Similarly, I think we have participants from different disciplines. If you can really find out, how exactly the natural farming can address the food security, can provide economic viability, and at the same time maintaining the ecological balance, if this is what you can get from the natural farming, then I think nothing like it. And what impact it has on the natural capital. Natural capital, like those basically soil and water use. So if they're economical on soil use and also on water use, I think this will produce a good thesis in the natural resource management frame. Then natural capital management and sustainability, sustainable future scenarios. How do you manage your natural capital? Like you have the soil health card. There are so many schemes, which being promoted to have a good soil quality, maintain the soil health. So if you can, similarly for water, forest resources, wetland resources. So there are many such issues, different type of forest. So if you can see how management plans can develop management plans on these different type of natural resources, and see that these different management plans will ensure sustainable future use. And if you can develop some scenarios for future, that also is going to be another interesting area. Sustainable development goals and government policy. So this is again, every government now, this is the talk of the day, SDGs. And by 2030, all the governments should have all the SDGs, and they say if you have fulfilled the SDGs, then that is the best life standard or lifestyle can be possible. So try to see how different policies are, contributing towards sustainable development goal. This is also a very timely topic. Natural disaster and well-being. So what are the impact of natural disaster on health, income, education, school attendance and scoring, defensive expenditure? Like in India, though there are studies on health and income, but on the education sector, the natural disaster has really not been studied. How these different natural disasters, this can be cyclones, this can be heat waves, this can be storms, or this can be erratic rainfall or flooding. You can take any natural disaster. Now they're becoming so frequent. So you can see how the education system is affected. So that means how the human capital formation is getting affected because of the natural calamity or natural disaster or climate change. This is one area where we have very little research in India. I think that is also another promising area. And then defensive expenditure. So defensive expenditure is, what money you spend, just to adapt to the natural disaster. So this also you can find out, like, the type of heaters now people are witnessing in different parts of the country, and how the money, the income is being spent, how they're, curtailing their expenditure on other services, and they're spending the money on defensive expenditure because you really cannot survive without air conditioning. So how a poor man is trying to curtail other expenditures and spend money to buy a air conditioning. So if you can also try to address these issues, what are the other sacrifices, or how the well-being of the people are being, or the developmental uses of the money are being reduced to spend or to buy the defensive expenditure. And so this also can be one part of the estimation of the cost of the climate change. Climate change, natural disaster and sectoral impact. Climate change and food security, evaluation of adaptation policies and activities. Natural capital in climate change, I think, and mitigation. This is one area also, again, nature-based solutions are being talked about. If you can see whether nature-based solutions are really enough to address the climate change issues. Non-market valuation techniques. I think there are some studies on non-market valuation because more and more studies are also needed on that. So if you can take up some of these issues, I'm sure you are going to do a good research and can have good publications out of it. Okay, and a database, you don't have much knowledge, but this is this embedded data. That is a global natural disaster database, and I think this is really good and you can use it. But now we have government reports which are very regular. Almost every state government are publishing the natural disaster report, the environmental study report, and the activities they're doing, the different interventions they're doing. So I think at least I have been using the data from the government of Orissa sources in my research. So government reports are becoming very regular, and most of it are also in the public domain. Then MOE, Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, they are also maintaining regular databases. And if you can go to that website, so that they are publishing also regular data on the environmental areas and also on climate change areas. You have IMD data on climate change. Data maintained by different networks like SANDI. Whatever SANDI studies are done, then you give back the data, and that data is also being maintained. Similarly, many other global networks are also maintaining good, FO is maintaining good database, many other ones. I'm sorry, I should have, maybe compile some of these, but these are all easily available. If you want to work, then you can get secondary data from there. But again, like my way of working has been on the primary survey, because when you do a primary survey and you collect data from the primary sources, that gives a different type of advantage aids to your research, because you talk about a local issue and you try to find out a local solution, which can have a regional or a global implications. So primary surveys are always the most welcome areas in climate change and environmental issues research. Okay. And coming to methodology, we have so many different type of methods. This is one valuation methods I mentioned for the ecosystem survey assessment. But I think there are many techniques available, and you can all use the standard econometric methods for your environmental research now. So I think let me just stop here and take up questions, because that way I think I'll be able to help the participants more, right? Stop sharing.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am, for a very detailed presentation on different topics related to environment, natural resource management, climate change, and ecosystem services. We have already got a lot of questions for you.
Yes. Yeah.
So we'll take up those questions. We'll start with there is a question on the chat window.
Okay, so there are questions in chat window and also Q&A. I've opened the chat window. There are two questions here. So one is that, good afternoon, ma'am. I'm a PhD scholar. My topic is wetland services of Chilika Lake in Odisha. Could you say which method is best for my topic? Now, Chilika itself is a wetland. So you should say ecosystem services of Chilika wetland in Odisha, rather than wetland services, because it itself is a wetland. So whatever services you are getting from Chilika are the wetland services. So ecosystem services of a Chilika wetland. So I think because Chilika is an environmental ecosystem, there are also many good studies on Chilika. You can see the Millennium Ecosystem Service Assessment that gives you the 4 different types of ecosystems, both supporting, provisioning, regulating, cultural, and services. Those 4 services you all get from the Chilika. I think the provisioning services are the most important ones, and in the provisioning services you are getting basically whatever people are collecting from Chilika, like fish and different type of aquatic species they collect, which are marketed, and also they use for their own household requirements. Chilika also I think maintains a water balance. So there are different so you can have 2-3 different objectives over here, and for you going for a methodology, I think you can use the market price method for estimating or valuing the provisioning services. And you also, depending on how the Chilika is maintaining the climate balance, then you can also use some of the non-market valuation. And maybe some people also have used, contingent valuation, trying to see how people perceive the benefit from Chilika. I think you can also go for that. But I will advise you to study some literature on Chilika first. See what benefits, what type of benefits people are getting, put them into different categories, and then think about the methodology, because method is not going to be a difficult issue over here once you identify your the services that people get from here. Okay. Then coming to the second one, good afternoon, ma'am. A doctoral student recently completed my coursework, want to pursue my research on climate change, food security, and sustainable environment. Can you kindly suggest. Sorry, where did it go? Where did that question go? I think
Uh,
methodological.
Can you kindly suggest whether it is the primary data or the secondary data which will be more helpful for me? And also, it will be great if you guide a few pertaining to methodological framework.
Okay, again, I think the same issue here. More helpful for me also will be great if you will guide me pertaining to methodological framework. This is climate change and food security, right? So I think basically we were trying to study climate change impact on agriculture because food security comes from there, and how much output loss, basically rice and wheat, because climate change studies shows that they don't have much impact on millets, but they have strong impact on wheat and also rice. So you are going to lose that. So because of that, there is some loss in food security. And so there are, but this is varying from area to area. If you have good irrigation facilities, then the impact is very marginal. And similarly, if you use some different varieties of inputs, I think basically now I will advise you to study the literature, because there are so many studies on climate change and agriculture that your ideas will be really well clarified when you study and when you try to find out what has been studied and what has not been studied, because climate change and food security is being addressed and there is a good database being maintained by FAO. So if you can study that, then you can sue. But I think my suggestion will be that whether the natural farming or the ecological farming that is being promoted by Government of India and also by many of the state governments, is that an answer to climate change and food security issue? That will be a good addition to the literature and also will give you good, mileage over others, because rice and wheat has already been studied by many people. So this will be a first study, and then you can get good mileage out of it. So you can take 2-3 different type of ecological farming in different climatic zones, and try to see how those ecological farmings are, how resilient are these methods and this productivity to different climate scenario. I think that will be really good. Okay. Thank you, ma'am, for the thoughtful. How to link shrimp cultivation with the environmental sustainability. So I think here you have to find out exact methodology or the way they are trying to cultivate shrimp. There are different ways: intensive shrimp cultivation, extensive cultivation, and also there is one natural shrimp cultivation which MS Swaminathan Foundation is trying to develop, where on the shrimp pond they're trying to grow mangroves on the boundaries, and so they're using, this is called the ecological shrimp farming method. So it depends which particular method they're using to cultivate shrimp. If they're using extensive or the intensive method, they're very, very harmful, which has been proved. You can visit some of the shrimp areas in the coastal Odisha or in coastal Andhra. So you can find out how the area is already devastated whenever you have the intensive shrimp parks. So many people are trying to develop different alternatives. So if you go for the sustainable or the environmentally friendly shrimp cultivation methods, then obviously they will be sustainable. So in this context, I will strongly advise you to study the literature which is being developed by MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and this is called, I think, ecological shrimp farming. Okay, so where they develop or they grow shrimps on the so they grow shrimps and they also grow mangroves on the shrimp ponds boundary. Okay. Then the next one. Good afternoon, ma'am. I am having interest in energy transition. I want to know what is your point of view on this topic and whether econometrics method I can use to explain this. Of course, and again, energy transition is the talk of the day. We are trying to go for all the sustainable energy consumption methods, solar, wind energy, and when you transit from say hydropower to solar, then I think these are the different topics. Though I have not done much research on energy, but I think this is a very, very topic in demand. And you can always do some studies and find out the research gap. The same, thing I will tell what I have been telling others. Find out the research gap, and then see whether you can do a good study on this, because energy transition is the talk of the day. We are trying to reduce the energy intensity. So in that case, government is trying to promote these different alternative energies. So and you can, first of all, you have to select your sector, in which sector you want to study, the household sector, industry sector, or in a particular sector. And in those sectors, what is the scope of using those alternative energies, and how smooth will be the, what is the cost of transition. I think these are the issues that you can take up. Ma'am, how to identify research gap? What if already that gap was breached? So if the gap is breached, then that is not a gap. So you have to study more further. So that means you have to choose a topic where there is a research gap. Research gap means what you want to study and whether those particular issues has been studied or not been studied, and if studied by others, whether they have done a good job or not. So research gap means, you have to find out what, something which is not being studied that you want to do. So that is for your use. When you select a research topic and a research question, so that question should be analyzed in a way which others have not done. That is the research gap. If others have done the same thing and you are also doing the same thing, then obviously the research gap has been addressed. Then you say, okay, they have done it for this area, I'm doing it for this area. They have done it for this particular sector of the society, and I'm doing it for this particular sector of the society. So you have to find out the gap that you are trying to address in your study. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Position. You mentioned that research should be of relevance to specific policies. In such case, how does one make a balance between a generic research topic and specific conclusion policy implication? Please share. So, no research topic is generic. So if you are doing a generic topic, then you are only developing a model. If you are doing a research where you are using some data, you are using some econometric analysis, then it is not generic. You are taking up a specific issue. So generic research is when you are just developing it, working on some growth models or some theoretical models, behavioral models, where you are not using any empirical. The moment you go for an empirical research, then it is not generic. It is a specific issue, and that will be the type of data you use. Will be relevant for those sources where you are using those who are producing those data. So I think this is wrong to say that analytical or the empirical research is generic. No, it is specific, and the type of data you are using, so your research will be of use to those particular sector of the country. So every research will have a use for the policy relevant. Can you please explain linear literature review again? So linear literature review means when you just simply try to, summarize what people have done. You write the name of the researcher and then the year in a bracket and say so and so they said this, they found out this. This is linear. When you do not critically summarize their studies, when you combine few studies into one paragraph, this is called non-linear. Linear means you study one paper and then summarize, study another paper, then you summarize. Do not do that. Combine studies, remember what exactly they are trying to say, and then write the summary in one paragraph, 10 studies in one paragraph in your language, where you are trying to say, okay, this is what been studied or said or been done by these researchers. But this is the gap. So these particular studies are not sufficient. Right? So when you critically study a paper, when you study a paper to find out the fault, as a researcher, have that in mind. You are studying somebody's paper and your objective is to find fault, not to support their findings. So that fault is your research question. Okay, that should be the motto of your literature review. Ma'am, please some light where I can take secondary and primary data for finding effect of environment on educated young person to involvement in economic activities. Okay, so that is educated young person. How do you? I think maybe you can see the employment data, educated employment and how they're doing it, or You can see the school attendance, or you can see college attendance, college scores, climate data to finding effect of environment on educated young persons. Or you can do some survey of the college going students and find out their attitude towards environment, how inclined they are to different environmental issues. I think this is what you can do, but otherwise I don't see there is any secondary data existing over here. Thank you. A particular study have done in foreign countries but not in some domestic country, can it be regarded as a research gap? No, this is not a research gap, because this is being done in a foreign country. This is not been done in your country, but maybe it can be applied to your country. So if you want to do a similar study, obviously you will have to find out, the data they use is not available in your country, or the method they use, maybe that is not, suitable for your country. So that way you have to find out, that is not a research gap, but you have to find out the gap that you want to do. I have two questions. What is the difference between research problem and research objective? Okay. And while doing ecosystem service evaluation, is mapping the service in itself a potential objective of a study? And if we want to develop a conceptual framework, then how should we go about it? Okay. Your first question is research problem and research objective. So research problem is basically, your objective is basically to study the research problem. So research problem is your identification of the research objective. Okay, this is a very good one. When you see a research problem, that means you have identified your research objective. Okay, and now you will see how exactly you are going to examine that research objective. And is mapping services in itself a potential? Of course. Suppose you are working on a particular sector where not many people have done, or ecosystem services has not been identified. So when you identify and map the ecosystem service, that can be one of your objective, of course. That should be the objective to start with. And then if you want to develop a conceptual framework, then how should you go about the model? So what particular conceptual framework? One need to be said, conceptual framework in what? Is it a new issue, or somebody, some issue which people have already been done? Because for different issues, different conceptual models are there. Like for ecosystem services, you have the Millennium Ecosystem approach. You have the use-based and non-use-based approach. So these are the different conceptual models. And so what exactly you want to do, or you can follow the conceptual model which has been recently developed by different people. If you go through the different issues of ecosystem services, the journal, so they have been publishing different, conceptual models in ecosystem service assessment. So see that and see which particular conceptual model is well suited to your objective. Okay. And to study the economic and social cost of adapting to climate change, please suggest sources and methodology that you think is relevant for this. Economic and social cost. Okay. So there are many studies, they try to find out the cost of climate change, the cost of carbon, the cost of climate change. I think you should study some literature on the loss and damage because of the natural disaster of climate change. So that will give you a good beginning to start with. So, and also, first of all, you will have to identify the economic cost, the social cost. What are the different type of, we have something called the economic cost and non-economic cost, measurable, which can be measured, which cannot be measured, like, loss of traditional knowledge, loss of tradition, loss of a sacred group. These are all the social cost, which cannot be measured. But some of the social cost you can be measured. So that you have to first of all identify what type of, and
No,
there
I
is
think there are a number of questions. Probably we may not be able to take up all the questions. So we'll have to probably stop here. Why I'm saying, because we have 2 more sessions.
I see. Yes, I know.
Yeah, and we have already covered so many questions. So I don't think really.
Yeah.
So in fact, in all our sessions, this has happened. Students have really taken so much of interest, and probably the research persons have been able to provoke them also. So what we'll do is we'll stop here, but again at the end we'll share the email IDs if all of you permit me.
Yes.
so that participants can directly write to the speaker and get clarification on specific issues, and they can also take help if anything is required. So that would be the suggestion. So thank you very much, ma'am, for a very detailed presentation. I'm sure actually, in fact, since these are all available on the YouTube channel of our Orissa Economics Association, so whenever they need to go back to all this discussion, they can go watch on our YouTube channel, and if there is any specific query, they can directly write to you and get the answer. So
yes, or you can share my email ID. I'll try to see if I can address to some of that
yeah,
queries.
you can, madam. Could you please type it in the chat window if yeah, or
I
yeah,
can do that. Yeah.
So,
Okay, and thank you very much. I think I went very fast because there was less time, but I think it's
no, you have
very
covered almost everything. So you covered a huge number of issues. So I'm sure students who can directly take out a number of issues that you have already flagged up. So thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Kesavji. Thank you. Bye bye. All the best, students. Is there a way that I can copy the chat? And can I copy the chat? I don't know. Is there a way?
No, I will share the questions you are telling.
Yeah.
Questions I will share, because since we are recording everything,
okay,
so the questions will come to my email, and I will share everything with you.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Yes, so you can just type your email ID in the chat window, so that students can directly ask any specific question to.
Good evening, namaskar.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we are going to the this basically panel fifth research person, or the fifth topic or area of research, and we have with us Dr. Bibu Prasad Naik, who is working at Tata Institute of Social Science, this Hyderabad campus. Prior to this, he worked at TERI, the Energy Research Institute, New Delhi, and then he has obtained his PhD from Isaac Bangalore and MA from Hyderabad Central University. From JNU, sorry, PhD from JNU, and MA from Hyderabad Central University. In fact, he is also the winner of Global Development Network Award, and he is going to basically speak on the issues relating to field research studies and community-based institutions. And if I remember correctly, the GDN award was relating to LPG and some RCT intervention that you had done, right? So he will be sharing his own experiences, and when he was working with TERI, he has worked extensively with the communities, how to basically promote renewable energy in interior areas. So with this, I welcome Professor Naik to take over the session. In fact, he was not well. In fact, he's not also feeling well, but then he has gathered energy to interact with the participants. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Just if I can take say one small sentence.
Sure, sir. Sure.
I think for everybody's benefit, Dr. Amarendra Das was also the earlier recipient of the GDN. I think it's called GDN Gold Medal, isn't it?
No, it is actually GDN gives award in different themes. So this is called Development Award, Development Medal.
Okay.
Yeah, they have gold
Development Medal.
Yeah, the first. Yeah, they give
Global
gold.
Development. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we are very sort of competent and bright people with us. Nice to. I'm looking forward to Dr. Naik, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Should we because the session is on, should we give a break in between the session so that people who want to take a bio break or something like this? No?
No, because we had 2 hours lunch break, so and we don't have also time. So yeah, I think we can go ahead. So if you want to share PPT, I think can now share.
Yeah. Okay. Just give me a second. No, how do I? Sorry. Correct. Okay. So, good evening, all. Or like, I mean, I understand we have people from different places, so it could be different times of the day. And thank you again. I would like to thank Professor Kesav Das and Professor Amarendra for initiating this workshop on behalf of Odisha Economic Association. I think this is very useful. So I'll be very. I have only, I think, 6-7 slides. So I'll be brief in my presentation so that we can have longer time for the discussion on this.
You can make it full screen, please.
Yes. Right. So, like when I was putting these slides together, I have kept in mind that this discussion is for a PhD application, right? So not a PhD proposal as such. So as I said, I'll keep it very basic. Some of these points must have already been covered by the other resource persons here, or some of you might be already familiar with this. But as I said, we will have a discussion on some of these issues, like once I'm done with the presentations, or you can also stop me and can discuss. Like we can also, I'll be happy to clarify and bring some of the anecdotes from my own experiences on certain things. So whenever we are working on a proposal, like PhD proposal, we have to keep these 3 H in mind, right? Say the first, right? So this is something which I call first thing first, right? So this is something that we have to, this is where we begin with, right? So all ideas and not everything, probably the detail will come. The first is, where are we putting these applications, right? So by where I mean the university or the institute that you are applying for, in that university or institute, the department that you are applying for, and also the discipline that in which you are locating your studies, right? So and like say, when I say discipline, I also mean here like all inter, in multi, or whatever these days all prefix that we use for the discipline also there. So we have to keep in mind what are we applying for, and also like say different universities, like also in our country, in many of our Indian universities also have departments which are not necessarily disciplinary departments, right? So there are also departments or centers within the research university, research institute or university that sees things from a multidisciplinary perspective, right? So we have to be the first, it's always better to identify the places that you want to apply, and then start thinking about your proposal. So that is something which will help you. I'll come to the discussion how that matters. Second one, the most important thing is, what are you planning to do, or what issues, or what the problem or the topic that you would like to work on, right? So this is something which has already been discussed by all resource persons, and this, I think we have been talking about that. So that is the second most important. What are we? Why this is important? Because like say research, PhD is a long-term engagement, right? So unless the issue that we are talking about, or the topic or the problem that we are identifying is something that interests us, it will be very difficult for us to sustain our interest for such a long period of time. So it's also very important to be very clear about the what question, like what is the problem that I would like to engage with, what is the issue that I want to work on, and like of course the topic is something. The other third thing which is very important, like I don't think I have not read this in the textbook, but I think it's very important when you are talking about like writing a research proposal, is with whom are you planning to work, right? when you are applying in a university, it's also very important to understand who are the, who are the potential people with whom you are planning to work for your PhD, right? So why this is important? I'll come to again, like why I think that these 3 W's are important: where, what, and who. Is the first, like why these 3 W's are important. First, many places when this university, when the PhD selections happen, right? So some of you must have already been familiar with this, or people must have shared. Each, the professor or the researcher had certain limits, right? So now I think the UGC put certain limits, right? A professor cannot guide more than certain number of PhD students. So when the PhD notifications are out, usually those people who can take new students are being consulted, and they suggest what is areas of their interest. And you see most of the PhD advertisements also specifies the topics, right? So on which applications are invited. So if your topic, it might be a great proposal, but if that is not something that matches the interest of, right, of the person who is open to take students, then it may not materialize, right? So it's also very important, like for instance. And when you say who, it's not just because it's not that when I'm putting an application, I think that I'll work with this specific person, and it doesn't happen like that, right? So you apply for a department or apply for a program or apply for a university. You don't apply for a PhD for a specific individual. So it's not necessary that you may get the person as a supervisor whom you intend to do. But when I say whom should you work, you also get familiar with the work of the person and also other people who have done similar work, right? So that makes you familiar with a specific area of research, right? So who essentially is is the set of people who are working on something that is of interest, on which that is something that your applications, you're putting applications on. So if you are keeping these where and who question in mind, or spend little time in understanding that, your shortlisting is easier, right? Because your proposal is something which is something linked to what the center or the university or the department is looking for, right? So at primary level, that helps for you, for shortlist. Second one is when you apply in a place, if you have a proposal that is related to the topic or the themes or the issues that the center or the university, the department is looking forward to. So your interviews are also much easier. You are already familiar with the people who are sitting in the interview, right? So in fact, if you write a proposal on the areas of research, or you're familiar with people who are sitting in the interviews. I'm not saying any personal relations or any kind of linkages that you establish. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about, when I mean individual, I mean the work, right? Or the research areas that they work on. So you can in fact decide how your interview will go through, right? You can say when the panel start asking questions, right? So they do not know you, right? So before, right? So how will they start assessing for it? They'll look at your CV, they'll look at your proposal, right? So then if whatever you have written in the proposal is if something which is of interest to them, or if they are familiar with that issue, they will start asking questions from there. So that makes your interview process much easier, right? So that's why it's also very important, these where, what, and who. If you keep these things in mind, that makes your thing very important. Third is selection. It's the selection is a very complex process, right? So because it's not that if you have done well, you will get selected for the PhD, because you only know how well you have done. You do not know how well others have done, right? But if you are if you are applying somewhere if you are interested in working on issues that is of interest to the people who are already there, then that is something which makes your selection the possibility of you getting selected if you do well in the interviews are much higher, right? So so if you keep these 3 W's in mind when you prepare a proposal, right? So that makes the shortlisting easier, that makes your interview easier, and that also makes the selection easier, right? But as I said, all these processes are fairly complex. Each university have their own ways of selecting people. Things are much complex. I don't think we have a right. So universal or clearly defined similar process for all universities. But if you keep all these things in mind, that makes your selection or the possibility of you getting selected is much easier. So coming back to when you are working on a proposal, what is research proposal? What it essentially entails, right? So again, I'll use these words, this W questions. First is the research proposal should talk about what, right? So it basically, when somebody reads your proposal, it makes clear what you want to do, right? So if something that is of interest to whoever is evaluating the work, then they will be they may prefer shortlisting or selecting your proposal, right? If it's not very clear what you want to do, if your what question is not very clear, what do you want to do in your proposal, then it's also very difficult, right? So so here the task, something that usually when you do is we try to define the research problem. I just I heard some of the discussion regarding this in the previous session. You also make it clear what research questions that you are pursuing, and of course the objectives of the research, right? So that is what the what question, right? So research proposal defines the problem, specifies the question, and states the objectives very clearly, right? So that makes, right, that helps whoever is evaluating or assessing the proposal to get a sense of what you want to do. The second thing is that you must have in your proposal is why do you want to do the research, right? So so here it so you should try to, the proposal should make a case why the issue is important, right? So the evaluator or whoever is evaluating you, right? So they have been part of that process for quite long. So their understanding of the problem might be very different than that of yours, right? So if you, but however, the researchers are also open to newer ideas, right? So if you are able to convince why the issue that you have selected, right, or why the problems that you have defined or the questions that you have stated or objectives important, then that makes your proposal better, right? So when I say why the issue is important, we can think about why the issue is important from the societal perspective, right? So we have many problems. So if whether your research is something helping finding a solution or giving a different perspective or a better understanding, the research is not all about the finding solutions all the time, right? So then that's something which you actually make a case. And the other thing is also discipline, right? So what kind of contribution that your research is going to make, or why the research is important for the discipline, right? That you have applied for, right? So that is something which addresses this specific question. Then the next question is, how are you going to do this research, right? So it so the proposal communicates how are you planning to do the methodology, right? And this is something which is very very important, how people do this. And also there are two other things, when are you planning to do this research, or where are you going to conduct the research is also very important. But when you are preparing for a PhD application, you can take these two questions easy, right? If you're not very sure about this, I mean, of course, it won't be like when you are working on a proposal, if you have not worked in the sector already, if you are a student who completed master's, MPhil, right, and then looking for a PhD, then our understanding of the issues will be very limited. So then if you are not very sure about like the kind of timeline or the where are you planning research, you can take those questions a bit easy. But it's absolutely important that the research proposal should make it very clear what are you trying to do, why are you trying to do this, and how are you planning to do this. One thing that you must avoid is it's not a great practice, right? To sometimes when we are writing a proposal, because I have also seen such specimen in the web page, right? We often look for such resources in the web page, and also very enthusiastically we state what are the expected results, right? It's a good idea to state the expected output, right, or expected outcome of the research, but it's not a great idea to state the expected results, right? So sometimes people, you may actually be misunderstood if you specify what expected results that you are expecting from this specific research, right? So it's something that you can avoid. So then coming to the question, how do you know, how do you define a problem? How do you frame a question? How to state the objectives, right? When I say, and this need to be stated very clearly, how do you do that? So one of the precondition, something which is very essential for this is we have to look for this. The first, the problem, our understanding of the problem can come from any sources. It may be we can understand or talk about the problem by reading the newspapers, or making some observations when we are traveling, when we're waiting in a railway station, when we are getting into conversation with anyone, right? Or it could be from a lecture, right? Or it could be from by watching some discussion in the TV news, right? Any of the news channel debates, or maybe a seminar, or it could be also from the newspaper. I already stated this, right? It could be just observing the situations, the problems around. But how do we state it very clearly, something that we can learn, to understand that? I think the easiest process for many of us always has been reading about it, right? If you read couple of papers on that specific area, if I want to work on community forest management, if I read a couple of papers on that and read it carefully, not read as I read the WhatsApp messages, or join a what they call it Facebook live conversation, but read it very carefully, then try to understand how people frame the questions, objectives, right? So how are they explaining or making the case why that issue is very important, right? And what kind of methodology is there, right? The specific studies have been using, and what all methodology that you have already studied as part of your master's or MPhil that you have already done. And I think that is how. So for me, I think the easiest way to understand this is reading few papers, right? So there is no alternative to that as far as I understand. Where do you get the papers, right? Some of you might already have institutional access to some of the journals that you are talking, something that is of interest to you. There are journals which talks about specific themes, right? There are journals that talks about the climate change issues, the adaptation, or similar kinds of different kinds of issues, or I think sometimes we may not have access to this. I think the easiest way for again to go to the Google Scholar, do some keyword search, right? Something that is of interest to us. Then we may find a couple of papers, read through that, look for the references that has already been used, and look for few more papers, right? Till we get papers like which basically tries to argue or discussing things that we have already like which we consider as a problem, right? So I think this is like, for as my understanding goes, this is probably the easiest way to get in here. Yeah. So let me now cover two specific some of the thematic issues that can be taken up. Yeah, like, can I stop here and take some questions? Is there any question?
Yes. So you have finished your PPT, or I want to say something?
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was telling that you have finished your slide, no?
No, I have few more.
Okay, I think then you better finish.
Complete, and then we'll take.
Yes, because we get a lot of questions and all together.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that would be good.
Okay, fine. Yeah, thank you. So okay, so then I'll be talking about some of the issues. I think this is what is that you can think about. So if you are this is the topic that we have discussed, that I'll be talking about this. So if this community-based institutions are something that interest you, so I have two broad areas when it comes to community-based institutions, the research on community-based institutions. One is the community-based resource management. So by resource, I mean any kinds of resource to forest, land, water, right? So water, it can be from irrigation and fisheries, or the pastures, lake, rivers, marine resources, any of the resources that you talk about. And in this specific, there are two broader kinds of research. I'm not very sure whether I should group these issues like this, or this is the right way to put this. One way of one range of topics, problems could be understanding these community-based resource management institutions for better governance outcomes, right? So where we, by better governance outcomes, I mean how these institutions facilitate collective action, greater participation, how it reduces the transaction cost. This is something that these are the issues which has been quite researched in last 2 decades or more. So we have lots of works on this specific area, and also how it, for instance, helps achieving better or improved economic, social, and ecological outcomes, right? When I say economic, social, and ecological outcomes, I actually mean a range of things there, right? So your research can only focus on the economic outcomes, your research can only focus on the social outcomes, or you combine the economic, social, and ecological outcomes. And there has been lots of research in this specific area that focuses on interdisciplinarity, sees things from an interdisciplinary perspective as well. So that's something that's a topic of different discussion. So that is one, basically, where we are seeing these community resource-based management institutions for better governance outcomes. The other could be something which has been very popular, in recent times, is we see these community-based, these institutions as community-based enterprises, as hybrid business models, right? Where we see these enterprises that can drive local prosperity from these specific resources, or alternatively, it can help livelihood improvement in the local context that we are talking about. The another strands of issues that's again that people talk about on these community-based institutions are the community-based climate adaptations, right, which is often referred to as CBAs, right? So these CBAs are being undertaken or being advocated to address the risk of climate change, for the world's poorest or whomever we are trying to focus, trying to understand what kind of practices or planning that is required in the adaptation, how people do this, or it could be simply understanding the social, political, and economic drivers of the vulnerability of the local people and of course by highlighting the needs of the vulnerable people, and then see how the larger policies, right, at different levels are supporting this or not supporting this, or what kind of policy interventions, right, or what kind of actions by different agencies, right, can actually address some of these problems. The other could be accessing assessing the effectiveness of these community-based adaptations, if it's already there. Some kind of things are there, like some of the adaptations which has already been there, right? Not being, it was not something called as a program or a project by anyone else, but that has already been built into how community functions, right? And also to understand what kind of lessons that you can learn from the local adaptive responses, and which will help the society to understand the larger, when you are trying to scale up such community-based adaptation, climate adaptations, I mean. When I look at the first set of issues, the community-based institutions, resource management institutions, it has been there in many parts of the world, again, for more than 1 or 2, 3 decades. So one way is also looking at the secondary data using different variables and come up with do some kind of analysis. But we have to keep in mind that the secondary data on these institutions could be we need to understand what these data talks about, why it is very important, because some of these institutions has been mere paper institutions, the non-functional. These institutions exist, but they might exist in the paper, or even if that they exist in the field of the community, they have been non-functional. So we have to also keep that in mind. Only by merely looking at, okay, this many joint forest management institutions have been there in specific country or specific states for so long, and then try to look at these analysis could be bit we have to be, I'm not saying that secondary data on this is not reliable, but we have to understand the nature of the data and what all it can, what all analysis that you can make from there. I think as beginners, right? So it's a good idea to again be guided by those who have already done similar work, right? So reading literature, trying to understand what kind of secondary data has been used is very important. Or else in most cases, people generate the primary data or data from the field, right? So this is why when I say that when you think about any field or location-based research, right, we can also think a specific location, where we would like to, a specific context where we would like to undertake a research, right? So we can think of household studies, where we try to understand the microeconomic behavior, the household strategies, depending on what our issues or interests are, maybe how the small scale farmers take decisions, right, on the crop that they grow, any kinds of issues. I was reading a small report on published by FAO, which basically it only talks about the small scale farmers in 9 different countries, right? And it was so insightful, in that sense. If you try to understand the problem of that research, right, there is no problem as such, right? I don't know, I'm not talking about the proposal, I'm talking about the report, right? So somebody who ever initiated that work, I don't think they have some kind of problem in mind, but the way they document, right? So how these small scale farmers in 9 different developing countries, right? So there are the crop choices, the marketing, marketing channel choices, and all those is something which is very interesting or insights. So a PhD proposal can also be something in that line. A specific location, you are trying to understand how people or how the household as a unit behaves, right, to a specific shock or trend, right? How over the period of time people have been responding to a specific trend or a specific shock. The other location or field-based research is around like what we call them as livelihood studies, where people try to understand or search more effective methods to support people and communities in ways that are more meaningful for their daily lives and needs, as opposed to ready-made interventionist instruments that usually we talk about like in our research. So like, I mean, I've just stated two different two strands of studies that we can think of if we have a specific location in our mind, right? So like an example that I can talk about, like for instance, we're trying to understand, have a research project on the rivers, and I'm not looking into, I'm not very sure whether I'm looking things as an economist there, or like, I mean, locating my research in a discipline, an interdisciplinary framework. I have not thought about that yet, but we are trying to understand, like in a specific stretch of a, like, I mean, like River Ganga, for instance, what are all different institutions, right, that exist for different activities, both economic and non-economic. Like we're still, so like, I mean, we are not thinking about any disciplinary location yet. Like we're still ideating on that. So we have identified a stretch of River Ganga, right? And then we'll try to understand, our objective is to look at different institutions that governs the economic and non-economic interaction of the communities with river, right? But as I said, it's a very open-ended and we're still work in progress kind of idea. So like for me, this is a more like, I've already identified a specific location and then trying to understand what all can I do. And they said, I'm not really locating, we will of course have to locate the research at specific discipline, or like, I mean, interdisciplinarity, whatever we want to call them, call it later. But like here, like I'm talking about a specific resource and then trying to understand what all different interactions that are there. So this is also one of the ways to look at the research. Yeah, so like with this, I'll close the lecture by talking about, like, and these key components that we must keep in mind once we decide on the topic, a theme, or the problem that we want to work on. The like, we need to have introduction or background in the proposal, then the problem statement that we want to make there, state it. Then we also do, like in the problem statement also, we need to like, I mean, it will be followed by the specific research questions and objectives that we would like to pursue. Then we also review the existing work and identify the gap and how that gap is informing or like supporting the problem and the research questions that we have. Then if it is possible, sometimes, like, I mean, if you are already informed enough, or like put little more time, if you can propose an analytical framework that actually makes your proposal much clearer and that convinces, like, I mean, that might be more convincing for the evaluator, but this is something which is not very essential. But if you can think of, and when I say analytical framework, it's not that you are developing this, you can also use somebody else and you can propose that, okay, you would like further develop on that specific thing. And what is most important is methodology. How are you planning to do this research, right? So that is something that like, I mean, people look into. And something which was not very important when we were undertaking research, but now that we look forward to, and it's very mandatory, is the ethical considerations, right? So that's sometimes we think that these ethical considerations are the people from medical sciences or who do like similar interventions, but like, I mean, also in the social sciences or like, I mean, in economics or like whatever the vulnerability, the any kinds of research that I was talking about, ethical considerations are also very important these days, right? So if you are trying to apply for any international universities or grant, this is something which is very important. Like, of course, even after you get, like, I mean, even if you are not able to visualize those and state that in your proposal, but once you start working on the proposal, right? So many universities make it mandatory for you to have this, like, I mean, state this ethical consideration that you have. And of course, you have to keep the timeline in mind, right? Most of the universities have an extremely strict these days, right? So for many different reasons, right? So PhD is not something that can go on for an infinite period of time, right? So I think there has been recently, there has been already guidelines issued by the UGC, right? I mean, that like, I mean, the research has to be carried out in certain like specific number of years, right? It cannot go on for the years altogether, like, I mean, as long as you wish. So it's also very important to choose a topic that is doable, right? In a specific timeline, right? So it's very important to specify the timeline as well. And also when you put all these components in a proposal, that makes whoever is evaluating or reading your proposal, right? So that makes them think that, okay, you are already into, like, I mean, you already have some introduction to the trade, right? So like, you know, the tricks of the trade, at least trying to understand the tricks of the trade already. So that creates a very positive impression among this. And also please note that the proposal that you submit are not necessarily the one which you will be working with later. You may have to go through several rounds of, you may have to change your proposal several rounds when your proposal is, like, I mean, approved or passed respective universities, right? So don't crack your like head in terms of developing. You of course have to burn midnight oil, right? So these days, like, it's midnight electricity, right? But then, but you don't have to really bother much. Like, if you are able to state these, if you are able to read the kind of literature, I think the previous speaker was talking about how do you organize your literature, right? How do you specify the gap? If you organize, like, if you put those, then that is something which is good enough to start with for a PhD proposal. So let me stop here. I'll take some questions and we can discuss it further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naik, for a very detailed presentation on the field-based research. And so we have already got a number of questions. So we'll be taking up all those things. So the first question is by Gayatri. Thank you, sir, for the great discussion. My question is, if the study is based more on secondary data, longitudinal studies in Western countries, but this type, sorry, 1 minute, I missed it.
Yes. Yeah. So, like, I mean, this is something that you have to keep in mind. That is why you need to do some homework, right? When you are proposing a longitudinal study, then you have to be very clearly state whether you have. So there are some villages in India, for instance, where the longitudinal studies have been done, right? So if you are doing something there, then you have to be familiar with what people have done it previously, right? So, like, we should not be proposing a longitudinal study on a place or like without being very familiar with that specific question, right? So yeah, hope I answered this specific question.
There is a question by Govinda. Sir, what is the name of the report that was about small farmer organization?
Yeah, I'll share this here, right? It's a wonderful study. I'll share in the chat box in a second. Yeah.
Then in case of primary study, how can we take a specific location area for research?
Right. So this is something which depends on the problem that we are studying. Okay. So if you are studying coastal erosion, right, the impact of coastal erosion or drivers of coastal erosion, then, like, I mean, your study area, of course, have to be located in a coastal region. It cannot be an inland region, right? So that's something, depending on what are you planning to do, then you choose a topic, right? So as I said, the problem, the area, these are things like we can get this information from multiple sources, right? So it could be the newspapers, it could be news channel discussions, it is from your own observation when you visited your uncle's village, right, or your own village, right, or somebody else's village, or a village you visited as part of your field work, like in your master's, right? So, like, I mean, that could be anything. I think this also requires some kind of like homework in that specific sense. Once you know a specific problem, then you understand which area is more relevant for this specific study.
Then there is a question from Niharika. should we specifically mention the statistical tools in a proposal or not? Because the statistical tools may be changed after reviewing more papers or gathering data sets.
Yes. So, like, I mean, yes, it may change. I absolutely, completely agree with you. Right. As I said, a proposal goes through several rounds of corrections. Right. But, like, I mean, it's also important if you are stating that when you are putting your proposal. Right. If you like, that's something which, as I said, that gives an impression that you are familiar with the tricks of the trade. Okay. You are already have some understanding of the issue. Right. If you do not state saying that, okay, I'll be choosing something based on my, like, whatever comes, right? So like if somebody knows you, then probably, okay, they know that, okay, this specific student knows the methods or tools, but has not stated, like, I mean, for obvious reasons. But if somebody has like, I mean, there is no opportunity for the evaluator to know you, then like, I mean, they won't be able to understand whether you know these tools or not. So it's, I think, like, I mean, it's better to specify the tools when you are developing a proposal. That can change, right? Forget about the PhD topic. I think all of us, a couple of years ago, I put a proposal for a SANDI grant. SANDI is South Asia Network for Environment and Development. So it was a 6 months process from my initial proposal presentations to the final proposal presentation there. And the proposal that I present, that for which I got the grant, is entirely different than the proposal that I put initially, right? So everything changed, including the title. Okay. Yeah.
So then the next question is, what approach we need to follow to win the trust of the communities?
Right. So this is a very difficult, like, I mean, not difficult, difficult question, of course, but I can share some of my, based on my experience, I can share some of the, but there is no uniform formula, right? So I'll share, I remember when I was, for my PhD, it was a case study of 6 forest protecting communities in Odisha. So when I was preparing for my field work, my supervisor told me that, you know, you have to be careful about your with whom are you developing friendship in the village. And then, like, I mean, again, with different discussions, I was told not to discuss politics when I'm in the village, because sometimes that divides people. So then, like, I mean, you win the trust of a group whose political views or world views aligns with you, and then you lose the trust of those, like, who are in the opposite side of the spectrum. So avoid the politics, right? So certain things which unites, for instance, the cricket. So I am not a cricket fan, but I remember before my PhD fieldwork, I like bought a book trying to understand the different records and all. I thought, I was told that, you know, that is much easier. You can develop some rapport with people. And I was told specifically, do not befriend the young men, like young boys in the village, because, you know, sometimes whatever images that they have, people start seeing you with that specific image, right? So winning the trust of the people is a very complex process, and I don't think there is any magic bullet, right? So you, like, get a trust vaccine and then go to the village, everybody trusts you. There is nothing like that. You have to work towards it continuously. Again, I can share one of my anecdote from the field. One of my study villages where I spent already 3 to 4 days, and that was, I have decided that will be my study village. I had to abandon that after 4 days of, like, staying there, doing some field work. As part of my key stakeholder informants, I was supposed to meet the women members of the Joint Forest Management Committee. So I was meeting a woman who was the president of the village, the Joint Forest Management Committee. So when I was interviewing her, her brother-in-law was sitting beside her, and he was answering everything. So I told a couple of times that, you know, like, I mean, brother, will you please stop? Let's, like, I would like to hear. I was calling her Bhabi, right? So I would like to hear from her. When he didn't stop, even after repeated thing, I told, can you please go out, right? So that I can talk to her. And that was something which was end of my survey there, right? So that guy, he went out, He mobilized people, and they came, say that this guy wants to talk to the woman in the like household alone, right? And like, so the whole trust that I built there over 3-4 days, like, I mean, just one specific response, right, has killed everything there. So the trust is something, as I said, it is not something like a vaccine or something that you, like, I mean, you have to work towards it, continuously building that. And also, you know, see, no matter how humble we are, or how, like, what kind of clothes that we are in the field, you already have a power relation in terms of when you interact with people there, right? So, so that power relation often keeps you away. Very recently, last year, January, when I was doing one of my field work in a village, I was trying to understand, I didn't have any specific data to collect, like we have a team of investigators they're collecting. I was there to talk to people, trying to understand their perspective on certain issues. And nothing was emerging, right? So when I was asking these questions, and I was sitting there with pen and paper, trying to record all those. Then when nothing emerged, I kept like my pen and paper in the bag. And then I just got into a general conversation, right? I start with, what is the name of that mountain? What is the name of this tree and all? And that conversation was very effective, right? So like many people who were not saying anything, they started sharing their views, understanding. They took me to the forest, they took me to the land, and like, I mean, something which, like, they were not even ready to sit there for 5 to 10 minutes and respond to my questions. They spent 3 to 4 hours with me, accompanying me to different places. So I, like, there is, you do not have a magic wand, or you do not have a specific wage. Like, I mean, this is something, and I don't think there is any, like, I mean, textbook or this whole idea that you don't talk to the young men in the village, don't talk politics, lawn cricket, nothing may work, right? So you may have different situations, and you are the best when you are in the field. You are the best person to assess, and you learn it from being there. Of course, you have to. It's always better to take the advice from those who have already been there, because, you know, sometimes, like, I mean, the learning which people got over like several rounds of a field visit, you get them with one such session, but you also have to be open to work on these ideas. Yeah.
Yes. So then the next question is that I want to do a study of economic and social costs of climate change. How do you recommend starting the process of interaction with the poor and vulnerable section?
Okay, I think the first is you need to understand what is this cost? What do you mean by the cost? That is, I think, the first understanding. Like, you see, you need to understand the literature first, trying to understand what people talk about the cost. And then if you want to do similar exercise in a specific context, then you try to understand some studies, or like, if you can go, if you have access to these people, right, you can try to understand something there, and then see what is the gap and what all, sorry, you can do, like what additional thing that you can do there.
Okay. Then there is a question that you suggested that one should not explicitly state expected outcomes in the proposal, rather just to mention about outputs. Please elaborate a bit more on this.
No, I say do not state the expected results, right? You can state the expected output, right? That if you're planning a publication, PhD. So these are the things that you can state it, but do not say that, you know, if you're doing a study on how people behave like in certain things, or if you're studying human-animal conflict, right? If you state the result there, so that basically suggests that you already have, like, I mean, framed in your mind what result that you are trying to get. So in those cases, you are undertaking the study to justify a specific worldview, right? So that's something which many people do not like, or we should not be as researchers, or like as people pursuing scientific temperament, right? We should not be going there with a preconceived like, I mean, notion, and then do a research to justify that specific thing, right? So usually what people call is like, I mean, we often need to be agnostics, right? So if we are a believer, I think there are people who think very differently. My colleagues and also people I worked with at different times, that the research should contribute to a specific like a set of ideas or specific movement, right? But like I individually prefer to be an agnostic, or like have very agnostic approach when I try to do, like I might have my own preconceived understanding or like of the problem or like what should be the case, but at least I try my best to be very agnostic, like have a very agnostic approach when framing the research and undertaking it, right? I think, yeah, hope I answered the question here.
Okay, and probably this would be the last question. What are the parameters to identify a good journal and a good literature?
Yes, I don't think I have an answer for this, but like the standard one is like look for the good publishers, right? Who is publishing good. Again, if you'll say who is a good publisher, right? So my answer is not that like it's Elsevier or Wiley or something like this. The one which are reputed ones already, like I mean, got some credibility there. So probably that's like I mean, there are very many good journals. Like for instance, Indian like our Odisha Economic Association, for instance, publishes a journal. Indian Society for Ecological Economics publishes a journal. I consider these journals as good journals, right? Because the people who manage the journals, who review the papers, are good researchers and good scientists. So in that sense, I consider them as good, though they are not being published by any of these like I mean big publication houses. And of course, like you have different kinds of listing that is being done, right? So in India, we have something called UGC CARE list, right? So there is Scopus. So journals who are Scopus indexed are supposed to follow all those things. So I think these are the like I mean, and for somebody like I mean, if you don't want me to be politically correct, right? Here. And if none of you mind if I say specific publication houses, right? Name specific publication houses, then I'll certainly specify some of the public publishing houses like Elsevier, Wiley, Taylor and Francis. So these are all certainly the good publishing house, at least for many of these, either these professional associations or these big publication houses that I've taken. Right, so I'm not really taking their names just to promote them or their business here, but I think my understanding of this is that. But of course, that's something that we have to work at. And also, you can look at the Scopus indexed journals are considered as the good journals, and also there are different ways to look at it. We can look at the impact factor of that journal. So that's also one of the ways to look at how good that journal is. Okay, there are many journals who do not even have registered themselves or have these parameters there. So when a journal is getting indexed as Scopus in the Scopus, then that journal meets some criteria, right? So that way, that reduces our task, right? If we'll go there, look at a journal, then we know that okay, this is a good journal already. Okay, and I think the best way is also look at your syllabus, right? Your master syllabus. See what all your supervisors have, what all journals that the course teachers have, like I mean the papers that is listed there, which are the journals. They're certainly good journals. Okay, I remember when we were master students, like I mean Google came after our masters, I think, right? So our teacher used to send us to the library and they tell us, look at this specific journal, like look at some of the papers. So they used to give us names of the journals there. So one of the ways also ask your teacher, like us, if you want to do research on international trade, then whoever a teacher who teaching international trade, speak to them, right? So they will be in a better position to tell you. If you'll ask me, I work on ecological economics, then I can list some of the journals like which are good journals in that specific specific field, right? Yeah. So any other questions?
Yeah, there is a question, although it's not very clear. but still let me read it out. Please tell about the methodology for the topic. Ways to involve educated youth in economic activities.
Sorry. Can you where?
Please tell about the methodology for the topic. Basically, probably the student wants to work on ways to involve the educated youth in economic activities. I don't know. Let me unmute him.
Yes,
So if you can ask the question directly.
Yeah, Suresh. Yeah.
Suresh, I am unmuting you, so you can directly ask your question. I think your question is 1 minute. Yes, Suresh, you can ask your question.
Hello, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, my question is that how I can choose my topic methodology that will help me to better research. My topic is ways to involvement of youth, educated youth in economic activities.
What do you mean by economic activities, Suresh?
Economic activities are those which can provide us to fulfill our basic needs, like to fulfill our basic needs, like shelter, food, education, like that, sir. Which we can raise funds, money, sir. That is basically need for fulfill our basic needs, sir.
Fulfill our basic needs.
Do you mean employment, Suresh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Employment.
Okay, right. So, I think you have to be specific. Economic activities is a very broad work, right? So, I do not know. Like, even if I work as a supari killer, I can also call that as a economic activity, right? Because that fetches me an income, right? Isn't it? Right? The whole this underworld, it also has it is thrives for the economics or whatever. They also earn some kind of living, right? And they also provide some key economic services. They provide security. They reduces the transaction cost. So they also provide certain services. So we have to be very clear about what specific economic activities we mean, right? If you say, for instance, if you want to understand how the educated youth takes part in what they call these days gig economy, right? So then probably you try to understand what are the different sectors. Then I'm not very sure whether we'll have lots of secondary data out there in this informal sector, or even there are also we have employment surveys, we have annual survey of industries that also provide some of the data about people who are labor surveys, provide the educational qualification of people, workers and all that. So you can also look into that specific thing, right? So one is looking things at a larger macro level. If you want to do that at a micro level, right? So like, for instance, who are the people you want to examine the educated youth's involvement in the farming activities, right? So then you can also understand a micro study, a village study, try to understand this. I think here first we need to first understand what do you mean by involvement, define what do you mean by involvement, and what do you mean by economic activities. Then we'll be able to, I think, have a very clear.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, there is one more question. Sorry, I think our next speaker is here. We have this. What are the secondary sources for data collection related to study on marine fishermen and other livelihoods in Odisha? We don't really have any secondary data, but I think we have. There are different fisheries research institute. There are also the coastal, what they call it, that's based in Chennai. I'm forgetting the name of, I'm not able to recall that now. You can, they also have this fishing fisher survey that gives some information, but I don't think you have any time series data, right? With many variables which can do, but that certainly can help you to understand some part of it, some aspect of this specific fisheries based livelihood. Very limited studies are there, but many interesting studies are there. You can look at Dakshin Foundation, right? So that's a research institution working on the fisher's livelihood in Odisha and several other parts. They have compiled some data recently. Okay, so you can look at that. And also, as I said, right, marine thing is also that Chennai-based research institute that also has some data. Yeah, like drop me a mail. I'll be sharing the database.
Yes. So thank you so much, Professor Naik, for having very detailed discussion on the field-based research and then community institutions, field research studies and community-based institutions. So again, there are a couple of questions which we could not take up. But then again, the participants, if you feel that you could not ask some question or your question was not addressed, please feel free to write an email to the speaker so that you will get a reply. I think I would request Dr. Naik to type his email ID in the chat box so that participants can send their queries to the speaker. So thank you so much again. And now we'll move to the next session, and that is the last one. We have with us Professor Badrinarayan Rath. Professor Badrinarayan Rath will be covering the issues relating to international trade, economic growth, and industrial economics. And Professor Badrinarayan Rath is working at IIT Hyderabad, and he has a PhD from Isaac Bangalore, that is Institute of Social and Economic Change, Bangalore. And he has a number of publications. If you see his profile, he has a number of publications, and he is involved in international journals. He's like in the editorial board in different journals, and he's also heading. He's also an active member in some of the like international associations, particularly in Asian continent. So he has a very great profile actually of a number of publications. And so we are going to listen to him now. So this I will, and of course he is also a member of executive committee of Odisha Economic Association. I also need to mention that Dr. Viprasad Naik is also a member of our executive committee, Odisha Economic Association. So with this I welcome Professor Badrinarayan Rath. Now the session is yours. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. And at the outset, I would like to first thanks, Professor Keshav Das, the president of OEA, as well as, Professor Amrendra Das, the secretary of OEA and organizing secretary of workshop, for giving me an opportunity to deliver a talk on how to write a research proposal. And I request, Professor Bipu to disable his screen because I am unable to share my screen. So, Professor Bipu, if
sorry.
No, he has already. In fact, I have to make you co-host.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Sorry for that. Yes,
Yeah,
please. I think now you can share.
Yeah. Is it okay? Are you going to see the slides?
Yes, it is clear.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay, so as you know that the topic of this online workshop, which was scheduled morning onwards, is all about how to write a research proposal. And already I think you have been listening to all the eminent experts from morning onwards. So therefore, my role as a last presenter is to talk about little bit about why to do research, particularly as a PhD scholars. Then of course I'm going to focus about what are the key steps that you need to focus while writing a research proposal. Maybe that I'll do for next 15 minutes. And then later on the 15 minutes I'm talking about mostly specifically by taking certain examples of areas which I am comfortable and as to the areas which Professor Ramanandra has suggested me to talk about. And then later on we are going to have almost around 20 to 25 minutes Q&A, so that if you have any doubts, I'll try my best to help you in terms terms of clearing those. Okay. So now let me start with saying why are we interested particularly to do a PhD? And I am again mostly focusing about this slide by keeping the Indian scholars in the mind. And if you know, of course, all of us, we have the passion for research, particularly thinking about some sort of strong inclination towards pursuing something which is going to help you. And of course, we are going to put a lot of effort and time. And it's not really everyone who are actually come forward to do research. But if someone is really interested to this research, that assume that he or she has a passion for research. Okay. And the second, you all know, is becoming an expert in your field, because let's say all of us, I'm assuming that all the participants who are actually participating here are from economics background, or maybe some of them are finance background. But you know, within economics or within finance, you know, it is a very broad subject. And but then when you are actually completing your master, or let's say completing your MPhil, that is not enough for us to go in depth of a particular, you know, areas within a particular subject. And therefore, if someone try to pursue the PhD, then of course is going to become a subject expert in the particular domain. And third, long-term career goals. Sometimes we all think not to really compromise in terms of getting some job just after master, but then those are all short run. Because if in some of you think that it is very important for me to look about in the long run, and not just in terms of job market perspectives, but in terms of gaining the knowledge and in terms of creating a certain visibility of yourself, your identity, then I also feel that again it is a PhD which can actually help those individuals for fulfilling their long-term career goal. And the fourth one is, you all know, the growing demand from the institutes and universities, and particularly if you look at over last 10 years, most of the universities, not only in India, but also in abroad, or you know, most of the countries like Asia and China particularly, and there is huge demand for this, you know, educations, and particularly the higher educations. And when I said higher educations, it is just not just the, you know, what we call humanities and social science. It also includes both engineering as well as the basic sciences. And as a result, what happened when there have been growing demand, then there are certain requirements from the, you know, what you call the institutions or university side, that you must be a PhD, or you know, if they want to recruit someone as an assistant professor or let's say even lecturer, then they would expect, though there is something not necessary sort of condition, but then as you know that because of the growing demand of institutions and looking about the quality of educations, it is pretty much becoming imperative that, you know, a particular teacher who is going to join in those universities and, you know, colleges or institutions must need to complete PhD. And therefore, again, there is a demand which is actually driving some of us or motivating some of us to go for, you know, the PhD. Then the next, of course, there are academic peer competition. Again, you know, though if I remember correctly, and there are some, I think, article published in the Economics, and again, it's a couple of years back. The article was trying to provide information about, you know, how the economics graduates, and particularly those are actually doing master as well as PhD in the United States, are placed in comparison to other subjects. And it's a very interesting that the economic students or the graduates in the United States, their average salary, or whatever the salary they get, is much, much higher than the median salary of the United States. And what does it mean? It means that being an economist, when you try to go for certain jobs, and particularly jobs are pretty much, you know, available, and the demand for the job is already there. But at the same time, simultaneously, we do have also peer competition. It's essentially talking about cost to, you know, company, or somebody just thinking about after completing getting a job is becoming to some extent difficult, particularly in the third world country like emerging country like India, or you can think about Indonesia, some extent Malaysia, I would say. And as a result, what happens, if there are certain academic peer competition which actually is there, and particularly after you complete your master program, then you may not be getting a job, or you might get a job but which you may not be satisfied, and that actually some extent helps a particular sort of group of those scholars to think about going for a better higher education, which is typically the PhD. As a result, if someone is going to complete a PhD or getting a degree with the PhD, then the likelihood of getting the job and likelihood of getting a satisfied job is also going to be higher. And as a result, because of that, the peer competition some way driven some of us to think about not just complete, finish our education just after the master, why not go for a PhD? And as a result, maybe the peer competition will be a bit less, or maybe if some of you think that peer competition is still there, but then you are going to be expertise in a particular domain, and in that domain you are going to compete. You are not really going to compete with others. For example, if you think in India, some of you, let's say, going to be graduate and getting PhD, then you are going to apply in the job market. But then if all of you are, I am going to treat you as a homogeneous group, definitely then academic peer competition is going to be very high. But what happened if suppose some of the institutions are interested to take or hire someone who is, let's say, very good in micro, or someone who is very good in environmental economics, or let's say they are actually requiring someone which is very good in macro, then what happened within that homogeneous basket, the basket which you are here, let's say around 200, but then the competition is not going to be among the 200, rather than it is going to be, what you call, divided into 3 baskets. And then within those small baskets are going to be less pure competition as compared to the entire, the basket, which is typically MA economics, or let's say MSc economics. Because mostly MA and MSc, we don't really think, okay, who are actually specialized what? But then here we are actually specialized, and therefore there is a specialization, and there are certain requirements with that particular specialization. And the moment you have a PhD, though you are going to have academic peer competition, but of course the competition is going to be very less, and likelihood of getting a job is much, much higher. Okay. And finally, the doctoral degree are by default, of course, is a training program for the academics. You all know that it is not just having a doctoral degree means that you all become subject expert. Till today, I am again, I have just completed almost 15 years of my academic career, but still I would say I am again a learner, and we all learn each other. It's just, of course, the doctoral degree gives some sort of, certification. Yes, he or she is already well or capable enough of, doing a individual research independently, or maybe going to be doing a capable of joint research with the collaborator. Those are some way going to be much, much smoother the moment we have a doctoral degree. Okay. Now, what is the research proposal? I think because of the time constraint, and as I said, all the eminent experts must have explained in detail. I don't want to talk much about that. And but I would like to just focus about, the steps, what we need to follow while writing a research proposal. Of course, again, the steps which I have written here is mostly looking about, the research in the broadly social science, because I don't know much about the humanities or maybe the engineering aspect of the sciences. But when you look about the social sciences, and particularly with reference to economics, we try to write a research proposal by following the major, points, which are, again, first one, of course, the introduction, and then we do have the brief literature review. I am going to talk all details soon. Third one is identifying the research gaps. Fourth, putting research questions, and followed by objectives of the proposed study. And then we need to also focus about theoretical framework, and then methodology, study designs, measurement of variables and data source, and relevance of the study, scope and limitations of the study, and followed by finally the references. Part you need to focus in the introduction section, an overview of the main area under the study, and that's actually going to be very, very important, particularly when you look about writing an introduction, I personally would suggest that all of you, particularly you are all the young research scholars, and you need to emphasize almost in the beginning, I would say 3 to 4 months, about thinking about how to write a good introduction. Whether you talk about a research proposal, whether you are trying to, if some of us, let's say some of us, we are a very young researchers and just joining as an assistant professor or lecturer, or even if, let's say we are professors thinking about submitting a research proposal for a sponsored project from DST, Department of Science Technology, or let's say from ICSR or any other, foreign institutions who are actually providing the money or the, funding or research grants. And then what happens for that, because of that, or even if you are writing a, let's say, what you call paper for your any sort of journals, or thinking about writing something to edited books, chapter in the edited books, so on and so forth. And because of that, I also personally think introduction is very, very important. And we must actually try to give more emphasis. Almost 30 to 40% of your time needs to be highlighted on introduction. And of course, when we are saying introduction, because that's actually something which is going to be very, very important. And that's, if you are clear what are the part you are going to focus on the introduction, then I think the following subsections are going to be much smoother and it's going to be pretty much straightforward. And an overview, of course, you need to focus what is that topic, and mostly when I will give an example, through that example, I'll again reiterate all those points which I have been highlighting here. And then, of course, you need to look about the preliminary analysis, the historical perspectives pertinent to the studies, and you need to focus, let's say, some introduction, and then you need to look at what are those history with regarding to that, topic which you are focusing. And then you try to also provide what is the current scenario. That's why I said preliminary analysis is all about the current scenario of the issue which you have been trying to highlight or proposing to pursue as a PhD scholars. The main issues and the problems in the subject under the study needs to be again highlighted. And also we need to focus in the introduction important theoretical and practical issues related to the central problems which you are going to typically focus. And some extent we also give at least a highlights about what is that main findings or you are expecting to get from your core issues needs to be again written in the introduction section. Review literature, typically identify the issues that are basic, of course, your studies, and go in-depth reading for those research issues. Keep reading, reading, and reading. That is again my suggestions, and I have been always typically tells my own PhD students. And of course, I think it is important because review literature is one of the crucial stages where the researchers actually try to divert here and there, or sometimes researchers think review literature is not that much important. While if you are clear about my objective, someone might think, okay, if I am clear about my objective, my research questions, and then I don't really think something which is already important into review that. But it is again the mistakes, because some scholars, they think that way. But my personal humble request to all the young scholars here is to think about how to do an in-depth review of any issues which you are planning to pursue as a PhD scholars. And that's what I said, how you are going to do review, you need to first identify certain issues, and which is already you have done in your introduction stage, introduction section, and then focus on that and go a particular thematic review. Thematic literature review means that if you are having a, let's say, PhD thesis, you are going to have 3 core objectives. Let's say typically when we economists at least try to focus on 3 to 4 objectives at a time and in your thesis. And then what we are going to do, we need to just go all each objective, that's I am assuming as a theme, and then you go in depth about each of those themes. and try to collect at least the literature from last, let's say, maybe 30 to 50 years. You can look into that aspect and then go in depth, and collection of those reading materials are very important, and then you keep reading those. While keep reading, you need to create certain tables, small tables. What does it mean? Is tables typically going to say first, let's say you are going to have a tabular representation of your review literature, and then you need to focus about the authors, and typically you can look at the years of the publication. Again, I am assuming that you are mostly reviewing and the papers, and which are typically the peer reviewed international or national journals. And of course, you are also free to review some of the books. You are also free to read some of the textbooks. But when you focusing about the theme, and then I am guessing most of the themes which we as an economist or as a researcher actually try to take in our PhD thesis as a part of objective, those are themes are going to be very much, or at least reasonably well examined by others. And typically, if that is the case, then we can say that yes, there have been certain research, and then we try to think about how to review those. And for that, as I said, you need to make a tabular form and trying to collect the information. As I said, first row could be the author's name, first column, second column, it could be, the year, and third, you can think about what is the objective of that paper. And fourth column, you can keep about what sort of methods they have used. And fifth, you can look about the findings. And before the findings, you can also try to highlight, what are the data, the frequency of the data, and what are the variables they have used. All those things you need to add in that, tabular format. And the rationale for doing that tabular format is when you're going to revisit, or let's say you want to go back after some times, then you can easily see that what you have read, you might have actually forgot, because you have keep on reading many articles, but then if you don't actually record those or keep a systematic way, then you might again forget, or you might again think about what is exactly I am going to do. Is it something I have done enough or not? And for that, it is going to be very, very helpful. You can look into that aspect by creating tabular format. Then the third aspect within the review literature is all about theoretical review and empirical review, because most of the economics topics which we try to focus, and by default economics as a subject where we have to heavily rely upon the theoretical review. What is that theory is talking about a particular theme? Is there any sort of connection with your themes with a theory starting from classical or neoclassical, or you can think about a new trade. Let's say I'm going to talk about the example of trade, then you look about what are the theories related to trade, or even let's say thinking about industrial economics or economic growth or any other topics as per your comfortable zone, which you have already decided to work on. And then you need to at least look into the theory. And then you have the theoretical review. That means a review which are associated, the theme which are associated with certain theories needs to be again highlighted in your review of literature section. And third, final one is of course the empirical review, which you are going to typically, which I have explained you, the tabular format, which is the example of, empirical review. Once you complete your review literature stage, and then you are going to focus or at least write a research gap or the questions, identify the main gaps in the existing body of the review, because the major reason for all of us to go for a review is not just getting enough idea about what so far the others have done, because of course that is one of the key, what we call tasks for us as a researcher, because when I said research, that means there is something we are again searching. Again, there is some issues which is already there. We as a researcher, we have to research in a different manner and think about the same issue or same questions in a different way. Then we need to look into that aspect. That's the way only we can do if we have enough readings. And reading is very important. And I personally think all of you need to at least read 5 to 6 months of your PhD time to focusing on review literature. And then only you are able to think about what is exactly you can do, what are the research gaps you can bring, and how those research gaps are going to be again, create novelty to existing literature. Whichever the literature is already there, you need to add something, unless you are adding something, it doesn't really make any sense for an outsider or whoever are already the expert, that they cannot see any sort of getting sort of feeling that, yes, this is something new. And for that, in order to add something new, this is very, very important. And for that, if you read more, and then if you read in the systematic manner, and if you do your review literature in a systematic manner, by dividing your literature based on the theme, by dividing your literature based on both theory as well as empirical review, then it would be pretty much easier, at least for you, to identify those research gaps. And this is the slide all about what are the research gaps and how to bring those research gaps based on the review. And once you are done with your research gaps, then you need to focus about the objectives of the studies. And it is again pretty much straightforward, which is typically what happened in a research proposal, or maybe when we are actually trying to do a what you call detailed in-depth review literature, we might come up with many sort of research questions, which probably not have been really attempted by the earlier researchers. And as a result, you might end up with having many research questions, and of course, you might also end up with very what you call research gap to all of your research questions. And then it is also not possible for us as a human being to at least make attempt to all the questions at a time. And therefore, when you come to objectives, though let's say I have 10 research questions, but I cannot really answer all the 10 in my thesis because there is a time constraint, there is a financial constraint, there is all other constant commitment from, let's say, thinking about going to the job market at a particular certain period of time. So keeping all those things in the mind, we need to only pick up some of the research questions. And those research questions we are going to pick, as I said, ideally it would be always 3, but sometimes some of us also pick 4. So it's again left to you that whether you want to focus 3 or 4, but typically 3 to 4 will be enough, in my opinion, to get a PhD degree. And then that's why I said the questions, once you have picked some of the important research questions, then you write those, in the objective should not be some way to, because always the examiners, or let's say your supervisor, or even the doctoral committee members, all they are going to be directly go to, of course, they might have a glimpse on the review literature section of your research proposal, but mostly they will focus about the introduction and the objective. And therefore, your objective should be pretty much, straightforward. It's not pretty much clear what exactly you are going to pursue. And that's also objective needs to give an idea to whoever is actually being the DC or the supervisor or examiner, that was, okay, this is the scholar is trying to do, or at least they will get a sense of what you are actually proposing in your thesis. And that's why writing objectives is also pretty much important while writing your proposals. And then theoretical frameworks, methodology and study designs. When I said theoretical framework, this is some way I would like to highlight here. Of course, again, my knowledge mostly on, related to secondary works and macro and some extent growth and trade. But I'm assuming that even if someone is, let's say, working in economics of development or environmental economics, or let's say in gender or health, or let's say public finance or financial economics, I am sure that most of these works or the areas in the economics are well, linked with the theory. And therefore, your objective must be linked with the theory. Theoretical frameworks needs to be clearly rewritten in your proposal, and it's sometimes also scholars find a difficulty, or at least I won't say difficulty, I'm sorry for this. It's like a confusion between the theoretical framework and methodology. Theoretical framework is a framework where you need to see how are you going to address your research questions or the objectives, and how that research objectives is linked with certain theory, and what are those frameworks, essentially how it is appearing, and what way that theoretical appearance is going to be going to solve at least your objectives. And that you need to either replicate if suppose we are not making any sort of contributions to your theoretical framework. Let's say that means we are just following what others have already developed, and that essentially we are going to replicate. But still, even if we are going to replicate, we need to again highlight, or we need to write in a research proposal, even if somebody has already developed that theoretical framework. Or if suppose you are so good and strong in terms of creating or criticizing the theoretical framework which are already developed by others, then you can bring a new dimension to the theoretical framework. But whether you bring a new dimension or whether you just replicate, but this theoretical framework is going to be very, very important. And I would say the methodology is completely different, because methodology is all about how are you going to measure your research objective or the theoretical framework which you have framed, and that theoretical framework, answer to that theoretical framework and measurement to that theoretical framework can be actually measured in different way, different tools, and particularly different economics or mathematical or statistical tools. When you try to use those tools are treated as the methodology. It's not just those are again theoretical framework. So therefore there is a clear difference or distinction between your theoretical framework as well as the methodology. Next, study design, particularly those who are actually focusing mostly on primary survey, and they need to again focus more about the study design. And I'm sure all the previous eminent experts, they must have explained in detail how to design a particular study. But in the secondary type of research, where you can of course have your design, but this is typically you can think about how many countries you are going to take, or let's say within a particular single country, you are looking about how many years data you need to take and how you are going to divide those data. If you are looking about, let's say, pre-pandemic, or let's say you're thinking about global financial crisis or post-global financial crisis, that means you need to create a particular design of your research, that those research which you are going to design must going to look at how that's going to solve your objectives, which you have already written in your previous sections. And then later on, measurement of variables. I think you need to kindly find out each of your objective, and then you need to focus for measuring each of objectives, which are the variables, indicators you need to require, and for that you need to again try to collect those, and then some of the variables, how are you going to measure? And for that again, it is the review of literature is going to help us in terms of understanding if some variables are important, and then we need to measure those, and then we need to also briefly explain those measurement of all those variables in your research proposal, or at least you can have a particular section on the measurement of variables. Then data source, which is, economics cannot do any sort of research without the data, whether it's the primary or secondary. And at the same time, it is very, very important for us to actually be honest in terms of providing the data source. Even if you are trying to copy some of the papers, or let's say a particular table, or you are bringing certain data from World Bank, or let's say IMF, or from RBI, or let's say from Odisha, our budget, Odisha economic budget, or let's say economic survey of different states or India, then we as a researcher, it's very important to at least highlight. But in the research proposal stage, of course, you are not going to bring those tables and whatever the data, rather than you need to only highlight where are you going to collect. And that's why data source is important, and you to tell, okay, these are the variables, these are the data I'm going to collect, and for these variables, the data source is this. For X variable, data source is let's say A. For Y variables, your data source is let's say B, and so on and so forth. And then after that, I think the last 3 sections of your research proposal is all about the relevance of the study, because nowadays economics also looking about whatever research we do, how much that is going to have a policy relevance. And that's why this is going to be very, very important. And you need to at least write 1 paragraph. But if you are, let's say, having a much broader issues, or let's say you have in very innovative issues which you have trying to do in your part of research thesis, then maybe you can at least extend to 2 paragraphs. But it is very, very important how that your finding or the research objectives are going to be helpful from the policy perspective, and that needs to be again highlighted in your research proposals. And finally, of course, we need to focus about the scope and limitation. Sometimes what happens when you start reading your review literature, and then when you try to looking about solving all those research objectives, but then you can solve those research objectives with certain limitations, or maybe within the certain scope that cannot be solved beyond that particular scope of those objectives, may not be really solved beyond those scope. And at least you need to again highlight how your thesis is again going to be, let's say, having some sort of constant, and what are those constants, and if at all those constants, those needs to be highlighted. And why we want to highlight in EPIC, because it is going to be very important. The moment you highlight that, you are giving a signal to the examiner, whether you are finding, as I said, whether you are defending a research proposal or whether you are submitting a proposal for a grant. Essentially, whoever is the examiner, he or she is going to get an idea that yes, the researcher is pretty much aware about what are the problem, and but at the same time, because of, let's say, non-availability of data, or because of, let's say, not having a particular time, or whatever the reason, is already given those information, which is clearly gives an indication that the scholar is pretty much aware about those. And that's why we need to also keep those limitations of your proposal in the proposal, research proposal, or within a particular section. And finally, references, which are very, very important. And these references is particularly important when you write a particular thesis. Of course, in the introduction, in the research proposal, you are going to highlight the few important references. Sometimes some of the proposals typically will be having a bound constant, in the sense, sorry, what you call word constant, in the sense maybe limiting to 5,000, or sometimes some of the universities, they might say, okay, you need to have a proposal with 10 pages. And if that is the case, in those scenarios, what happens, we cannot really give a exhaustive list of all the references. Rather than we can only focus about the few important references, and then of course you can provide the footnote saying that all other detailed reference, if anyone interested, then it can be available upon request. Okay, that way you can add the footnote, then you highlight only the few important references. Now I'll quickly move to, it's already, I guess, but I started, I think, around 5-6 minutes late. I request Professor Amarendra to give me some more time, if that is the case.
No problem. Yours is last one, so you can stretch it. No problem.
I'll try my best to finish by 5:10, maybe, sorry, 6:10. Okay, thank you, Professor Amarendra. Now let me go back to, whatever so far we discussed about how to write a research proposal. Now I am just trying to see research, identifying sort of research topics on trade and particularly and growth. So if we are, suppose we are actually interested to do the research in those areas, then what are the steps we need to follow as a scholar? Though I have actually made some of the bullet points, and therefore I felt it's important to share here. And my first point is, start reading the basic theories of international trade and theories of. Someone is talking. Could you please unmute? Sorry, mute. Thank you. So as I said, if suppose I'm interested, some of we are interested to work on, let's say, international trade, because that is actually very, very important step. And I must say that whoever is the student, and when someone start, registering as a PhD scholar, always it is actually becoming a challenging task for the students to think about how to work and which area we need to pick, and whether we are going to take an area which is going to be, some way helpful for me to actually pursue my research for next 5 to 6 years. And because of those issues, it is very, very important that once you need to first identify or at least decide your mind, yes, I am interested to work on international economics, or I am decided to work on economic growth, or let's say industrial economics, or interested in, let's say, development economics. The moment that is, again, I don't think is actually you need to think about asking the supervisor. Sometimes some of the scholars, they actually try to ask, but it is, yes, supervisor can help in terms of telling what exactly you need to follow. But again, it is come way, I personally think it has to come from you, in the sense your own interest. That is going to be important, because if it is not, you are having some interest and you are simply working up a particular topic because your supervisor is comfortable in that topic, then it will be becoming a bigger issue. Because bigger issue in the sense, maybe you may not be going to enjoy the topic which you have chosen based on your supervisor given, or maybe something which you are really feeling difficult in terms of understanding. And so therefore, that's again very, very important. And I am assuming that step I did just highlighted here because I am coming to the step which I am assuming as a scholar, you have already decided to work on international trade. Okay, let us assume that way. And someone already decided to work on industrial trade, then international trade, then what are the steps as a scholar he or she needs to take? And same example can be given to the other scholars, even if they are not working on international economics or trade. As I said, first step is start reading the basic theories of international trade. Either you take Paul Krugman or you Salvatore, any basic economics, international economics book is pretty much important. And you need to understand, though you must have taken as a course during your master or UG or PG, but then when the moment you join as a PhD scholar and the moment you have decided to work on that topic and that area, then you need to first understand all those basic theories. And that's what I have written, trade-based, let's say, absolute advantages, starting from, you can think about the Adam Smith and David Ricardo, all those Hexer-Ohlin theorem, for example, new trade theories. And similarly, if someone is working the growth, all the growth models, whether you were looking at starting from, the Harder-Domer and the Solow, or you can endogenous growth models, all those models and the theories needs to be in your cup of tea, because you are going to be the master in this subject. And tomorrow in the interview board, everybody, if you are working in the PhD in the international trade, they won't ask, of course, they're going to ask what are your thesis objective, but mostly they're going to ask all the theories. And that time, if you are unable to answer those theory, but you have done a PhD in international trade, that is going to give a, some sort of different impressions to those, whether the examiners or whether, who are actually the expert panel sitting in the interview board. Then second step, once you are clear or at least gaining the knowledge about a particular domain, which is the international trade in my example, then second step, search for the emerging topics related to a particular areas of trade or growth. How are you going to do? There are two steps. First step, just go to Science Direct and Scopus, because those are the two. Google search is okay, but to some extent, I personally think it gives wider range, and some of those journals are not really that great. And therefore, as my friends, Professor Bibu is also talking, Scopus. So that's why you need to go to those two, website. Scopus is more broader because it's just not focusing or confining to Elsevier. It also takes all the other major, reputed publishers like Wiley, or you can think about OUP and Springer, so on and so forth. And what you need to do, you need to at least search some of those emerging topics. How are you going to do? While reading this, the basic trade theory, you will get certain knowledge. Let's say terms of trade. I'm just giving a terms of trade, or think about trade diversification, or think about the global value chains. Those are the emerging areas which we have been hearing here and there in the newspapers, whether you read Business Standard or Economics Times. And then those, the topics, you just put those keywords in this Science Direct and Scopus or in the Google search. But as I said, third maybe option would be the Google search, but first preference always Scopus and simultaneously Science Direct. Then once you have that topic, which as I said, we will put those are automatically, it will pop up with certain, around 1,000 articles or something. Then you no need to really go in depth and collecting and writing. What you need to do, you need to focus about certain journals and which are really important. Like I have highlighted for international trade as well as growth. Mostly I have focusing about international economics here. You need to look about the QJE, AER, then JEL, Journal of Economics Perspectives, Journal of International Economics Review, Review of International Economics, Journal of Economic Growth, the World Economy, International Economics, and Review of World Economics. Those are the top-notch journal in international trade and finance, mostly in the trade, I would say. And therefore, your job is to, after identifying those 100 journals, or let's say 1,000 journals from the Science Direct and Scopus, you try to make out a list of journals, and these are the list, and then go to at least last 10 years. And you try to focus by collecting those, at least it's not necessary to read. Just your job is to write down the author's name, the title of the papers, and which year they published. That's it. That is what you need to do. But you need to need not deviate from, apart from these journals to other journals, because someone can definitely go, but then your tax of searching is going to be much massive, and it's going to be more time consuming as well. And therefore you need to focus about those journals in last 10 years and pick up all the relevant emerging topics, which are the topics, what are the areas the papers have been published in those journals. Then third, make these whatever into 3 baskets. Okay, let's say you have already written that, then make a particular basket, 3-4 basket. And I have written, let's say trade diversification. For trade diversification, you got let's say 3 papers from American Economic Review, 1 paper from Journal of let's say International Economics, and all those journals related, whatever the journals, but you are making a basket based on a particular theme. And then once you do that, then it will be much easier to understand, and at the same time it's going to be helpful for the post step is to pick one of the broader research topic from the basket. Then you go in depth searching about those themes. And particularly that moment, once you have all got an idea, okay, these are the top-notch journals. And in these journals, these are the emerging issues that people have been, at least the scholars have been working over last 10 years. And then you find some interest. Again, my strong suggestion, don't go by all the papers. Even if all the papers are, let's say, published in the trade, don't really do that. Don't write those. You write whichever paper you think important, at least you get an interest, because while browsing, all of us will have certain interest. Professor Amarendra will have different interest. Even if he or she is working in trade, I am working in trade, doesn't mean that both the interests are going to be similar. And maybe some papers are going to be common, he's going to pick up, I will also pick up. But then there are certain papers which are going to be differ. And that's rule varies, applies to all of us. And that's what I said, you need to first pick up, then make 3 baskets, 3 to 4, at least 3 baskets. Then within the particular basket, you feel, okay, this is the basket which I am comfortable. Then pick up certain topics and go to that list which you made. Okay, then you start reading that basket. And not only read that basket, the 5th step is cross-references are very important at that stage. And particularly what happens the moment you start reading a particular papers, then you will look at the backside of that paper must have cited certain issue. Because why it is important? Because cross-references is going to give you a lot of information about the same theme which you are interested by reading a particular paper. You read that paper, then you follow the cross-references, the reference list, then you again pick 3, 4 or whichever important from that cross-references, then you also make your list and keep reading those. Once you are thorough with this aforementioned 5 steps, then you will be very much getting certain knowledge and clear about your research which you want to focus within the international trade. 7th, while doing that, pay attention while picking a topic should not be too widened or too narrow. That's again an important issue, that we need to focus a topic which are going to be not too wide. Let's say I said global value chain. Global value chain, the concept or the issue of global value chain, if I am interested to look at the research, that itself is going to be too much widened because there are many issues related to global value chains. And if at the same time, I'm only going to, let's say, narrow down the global value chain, I'm going to just thinking about how global value chain is going to impact, let's say, the growth. Then that became again too much narrow because it is not, maybe it is important or maybe some of us can do a research, but that will be end up with having only one publication. But one and the publication may not really going to give us a PhD degree. And that's why we should not be too narrow and it should not be also too wide. And you need to pick up certain topics. And within that topic, you pick at least 2, 3 broader, areas or research questions within that particular theme. And second, as I said, questions are linked with the theories and must make sure that whatever you are picking, it must have both some sort of empirical evidence as well as theoretical linkage to those research and clear knowledge about getting the data and availability also, because you find excited, getting those topics. You said, okay, I have really gone through all the top-notch journals. I have looked at all the 10 years and this is the area which have been pretty much my interest. But then suddenly you have moved a lot. Then when it comes to after you clear, what you call defense your research proposal, then next stage when you go in depth analysis, then you find, okay, no data is not available. This commodity data is not available, or export for countries to major trading partners data is not available. Then it will be an issue. That's why it is important during your research proposal stage. You need to also focus. Okay, I am thinking excited research question and can it be objective? Then can I measure it? Can I get the data? Those are all the aspects you need to also focus. Then 8th step, preparing the core chapters objective in such a manner which will be chance of publications in the peer-reviewed journals. Because that's actually when I was looking about most of these journals, as well as I also suggest some of you, Journal of Economic Literature, we all know. And in that journal, there will be sometimes some of the issues, they write list of the theses published in the worldwide, particularly in the top-notch journal, universities. And that helps you. It's not just international economics. They make the list with macro, the micro, many areas. And I also request all of you to focus about the JEL and then go to some of the issue where you see list issue exclusively, maybe 20 pages. They just, provide the list. And that gives you overview, at least the idea that what are the theses so far have been, worked in those areas. That's again important for us as a research scholar. And I would like to share, and I think most of us, we all know that most of the US and UK and most Western Europe, they focus like 3 essays in international trade, or let's say 3 essays in development economics, or 3 essays in monetary policy, so on and so forth. So why they do that? Because and it's not necessary that each essay, what they do as a part of PhD are going to be completely interlinked. In fact, there are issues which are completely not interlinked, but it is only comes under the broad, umbrella of, let's say, trade or growth or, macro. And that's why when you try to do that, your objective, of course, India, we look at least each core objective must actually have some sort of, coherence as well as interlinked with each other. And that's partially okay. I, as a personally feel that it's not necessarily going to be always that way, because the world is moving the way we need to also think about how the other, countries are doing the research. And therefore, as long as your research questions are in a particular broader umbrella, as long as they are novel and innovative and you are giving something new to the existing literature, then you should also go ahead with those questions, even if they're not, completely interlinked. And then, as I said, you need to focus about writing a chapters in such a manner, because what happens, the paper format is becoming at least popular. I would say because of this, recent UGC, I don't know whether the new educational policy they are going to change, but at least I would say in the IIT systems, since I'm from IIT, I know we have the students need to publish 2 papers from their thesis, and that needs to be in the Web of Science or Scopus. And then in that scenario, what is going to happen if you are not really thinking about publishing your objective. That means you want to say, okay, let me get the award, and after that I will do my publication. That is not going to be possible. Possible, at least, as I said, some of the institutions, but I don't know again. But I heard from my friends, UGC also followed that. But irrespective of that, the job market, think about the job market, because you are going to be, after getting your award, you are going to enter to the job market, and that time you need to also showcase your, output. And output typically, of course, apart from your career, marks and all, is again all about the publications. And sometimes you need to also think about that way. And that's why I'm saying, when you try to prepare, and the chapters, if you start making fast in such a manner, you can quickly send to the journal. Because honestly, nowadays, typically any peer-reviewed international journal in economics, the average time period is 1 year. It might be sometime more. And if I am thinking about a student who is already 3rd year, okay, and I have to submit within the 5th year, because that is the fellowship I'm getting from MOE, Ministry of Education, or whatever the source. And then if you send 3rd year, then if you are not sending any paper by 3rd year, that implies that you may not really come up with 2 publications on the end of the 5th year. Because sometimes it takes time. As I said, average time period is 1 year. And if it is, by mischance they get rejected, then you have to again send to another journal. That again takes another year. And keeping those in the mind, if we try to start making a proper plan in terms of designing those research chapters in paper format in the beginning, then you can add all the existing, extensive review and all other aspects in the later on by expanding your paper's format to the chapter formats. In the later stage, won't be an issue. And the final one is identifying suitable conferences and journals in your areas of research, because that is very important. Sometimes some students think, okay, any journals I'm going to send. That's again not the issue. And if you do that, it might be, your paper might be very good, but you have sent to your area is, let's say you are working in trade, but you have sent a particular paper to a development related journal. Then by that time, 6 months you wasted, because sometimes journal, of course, nowadays, most of the better journals, they make the desk rejection. But even if desk rejection, they also take at least 1 to 2 months, maybe barring few journals who actually take the decision within 15 days. But then if suppose you are sending a moderately journal, then the journal may not really send you back, but after 6 months, they will say, okay, the paper is not matching. Your paper is so very good. Your objective is so clear, but unfortunately, this paper is not matching theme up to our journal. That's why I have been highlighted in the board saying that identifying the suitable journals and areas are very, very important. And so those are the 9 steps you need to follow. And there are certain database, which I also think before the database, how to develop writing and gaining sound knowledge, understanding the recent development. And for that, at least you need to allocate 2 hours every day for 3 to 4 years of your tenure. And then be familiar, because nowadays, either economic subject in such a manner, we have to compete with the global scholars, in the sense the scholars from various parts of India, the scholars from various parts of the world. And therefore, you need to also familiar with all these econometric softwares and writing skill. And this is very, very important. Of course, you will develop over the years. And more importantly, reference writing. References writing, even 5th year students, sometimes they miss. They write sometimes capital letters, some of the word they put in the small letters, sometimes year will come fast, sometimes the year of the publisher authors is coming in. Those are not the way to write. And therefore, you must give at least, proper care to writing a reference, because that gives a lot of impressions to the editor or even the examiner. They feel very angry if you have, let's say you have writing a paper and put my author paper and you have not really written correctly. If I get, even if your paper is so good, or even if your thesis is so good, I get upset that, as a scholar, you have not done the justification. So that's, again, you need to take care while doing that. And I'm sure you'll do. And these are, again, the database. And I'll definitely help any of you are interested to know more details about, the trade data. You can write to me and I'll try my best to help. So with this, I would like to stop here, but of course, I'm ready for taking some Q&A and questions from the audience. Okay, thank you.
Is Amarendra there or?
I don't see him.
Maybe Amarendra got disconnected.
Disconnected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah. Sir, you can also moderate the session.
Yeah, no, so the only thing is we have really sort of crossed whatever time we had. So maybe unless there is any pressing questions, I think it would be the questions that I see in the Q&A section. I think those may be directed through an email. Maybe may I request Professor Badrinath to write his email ID to sort of save us some time, so those issues can be responded. And I do not see many questions on the
Yeah, so there are a few questions in the chat box.
Yes. Yeah, so let Professor Rath decide which one or two questions maybe. You may please choose and
thank you so much. Okay, I can see there are 3 respected. It would be great if we can get the PPTs that have been presented today so far, at least as many as possible. Okay, that's again, I just think the organizer is going to take a call on that. And I don't have any issue with respect to my PPT to share. Okay. Second, the objective, aim, and hypothesis. What is the difference? And I think there have been many differences. When I said hypothesis, that means already it's well tested some way, and then you assume that there is a, let's say I talk about Y and X, and I assume that your Y and X is going to have a positive relation. Let's say I think about economic growth, and let's say I'm giving the example of trade. We know trade openness, which is export plus import by the GDP. And let's say I am interested to examine the impact of trade openness on emerging market economy, okay, by taking 20 countries. And when I said that is the objective, my objective is to investigate whether trade openness is having any sort of impact on growth. My hypothesis here is that whatever the examination already people have, tested by taking different countries or different contexts, then that talks about, of course, we look about null hypothesis and the alternative. I don't want to discuss more detail on about that. But hypothesis in this example, yes, trade openness is going to have a positive impact on growth. That is the hypothesis which you are going to test, because you already a priori know there is a positive relation, but we don't know whether that's going to be the case in case of emerging market, whether that's going to be the case in case of the data which I am going to use, whether that's going to be the case in case of if I try to use a penal co-integration. Let's say I'm not interested to use penal co-integration, rather than I'm interested to use, let's say, the system GMM model. Then, it might also, because of the techniques which I have used, because of the data which I have used, the results might come to different. If results are same, then I said, yes, my objective is supporting the hypothesis. If the results are different, then I can say, even if that the null hypothesis is this, the trade openness will have a positive significant impact on growth, but it doesn't really happen in case of emerging market. Okay, the third question you asked within that, let me again go back. AM. So AM is, again, I don't think there is a clear linkage between your objectives and hypothesis with the AM. Aim of the studies, typically you need to focus on particular issues, and that issues not necessarily going to be the objective. And as I said, you can think about the trade openness. You are interested to look at how the trade openness. Of course, the AM is about trying to see the trade openness as a variable or as an indicator, how that is going to link with the growth. And that's the aim you are trying to do. And without thinking about the objective, without thinking about the research question, the hypothesis. Aim should come first, and that's what I'm saying. The aim, you have decided to look at trade openness, then you at least try to look at the preliminary data, or you are thinking how the export import are actually behaving, the trends and the growth rate, and why you have picked that is as a aim. When you have a aim, in the sense it needs to compass, then of course that doesn't necessarily going to be same as what you are talking about, objective and hypothesis. I hope I am clear. If you think there is something you need to debate or discuss, please feel free to ask me at the moment. Again, I can see the name is I think foreign research scholar Don Parry.
I'm sorry, actually. In fact, there are some internet issues, and I just got logged out, and so I'm sorry, very much sorry for that. But then, thank you very much, Badri bhai.
Yeah, I have answered both the queries. I could see one they're asking for the PPT, and of course, third one is thank you, sir. And I have yes, from my side, I try my best to answer both the queries.
PPTs, I think, is not a concern at all, because all the proceedings are available on the YouTube channel of Orissa Economics Association, and I have already shared the link with all the participants. So I think that should not be an issue at all. So participants can always go back to the recordings and check whatever they want. Okay, so thank you very much. In fact, you had a very detailed outline of the research proposal writing, and you have explained in details the big part of the proposal. In fact, student might have already learned actually how to do a review of literature and the importance of every section, and even you have also explained in details like importance of having a PhD, and particularly some. In fact, in the earlier sessions, students are asking about a few good journal names. So you have already given those detailed lists. So with this, I again thank, and we will conclude this session. Thank you very much, Professor Rath, for giving your valuable time. So students who are interested to get more insights on the related East field, you can get his email ID right now here, or you can visit his website, IIT Hyderabad, okay, and check his publication profile, and so you can always ask anything to him directly. So thank you so much. So yeah, so would you like to say something, Professor Rath?
Yeah, no, I would like to again thanks to all the participants for listening to this workshop, which we as a OEA, because I am also part of the member, I feel really happy that all the participants, they actually sat together throughout the day. And at the same time, I'm really grateful to Professor Keshav Das, as well as grateful to Professor Amarendra for giving me an opportunity to at least interact with all the students for last 1 hour. So thank you all. And as Professor Amarendra said, I have already shared my personal Gmail ID. Of course, you can also send to my official email ID, and I will definitely try my best to help if some of the research issues or some of the problem which you are facing in terms of methodology aspect, you can definitely contact me, and I will try my best to help you. Thank you.
So I would like to invite Professor Keshav Das. Sir, you wanted to say something?
Yes, let me thank everyone. I mean, all the excellent resource persons and all the participants. The response has been overwhelming, and this was a kind of a special initiative we had undertaken. We are not very sure how it would go, but it looks like we have made a mistake. And with that, as we are sort of ending this event, and with a lot of inputs that came in, a lot of questions which probably remain to be answered, and that's all the doing. Two small points if I may add. One is probably as research scholars, particularly younger research scholars, one thing we should look forward to is sort of how to enhance what I may call a socialization. So not just to confine yourself to yourself, maybe sort of interact with people, whether sort of personally or sort of through social media, and also interact with your peers, interact with people who do not belong to the but might be making interesting enter into arguments with due sort of respect to the fact that there could be multiple views on the subject. And one last point is about the language, or if I may call it as articulation. So please do make efforts to write and read at least two books which we generally only refer once in a while. So if you get time, please read good dictionaries and please read good thesauruses. So that might improve your language skill. I think with that, I again thank everyone for the patience, for the interest. And this has given us enough inputs for doing similar or better events in future. Thank you very much from my side.
Okay. So to conclude, I would like to propose a formal vote of thanks to all our eminent panelists, or say the resource persons. In the first half, we had the president of Odisha Economic Association himself, Professor Keshav Das. Then we had Professor Uday Shankar Mishra from International Institute of Population Sciences. Then we had Professor Tara Nair from Gujarat Institute of Development Research. Then we had Professor Saudamini Das from Institute of Economic Growth. And then we had Professor Bibhu Prasad Nayak from Tata Institute of Social Science. And then finally, we had Professor Badri Narayan Rath from Indian Institute of Hyderabad, Bhubaneswar. So, in spite of all difficulties, for example, Dr. Bibhu Prasad Nayak, was not very well, and but still he participated and he spoke so well. And so, in fact, looking at the questions and the presence till the end, now we definitely feel that participants have immensely benefited from this. Of course, I have shared also a feedback form with all the participants. If they would like to suggest anything else to make it again further better. But for us, this was an experiment also, and I think we have been successful in doing this, because we covered a large number of issues. So I think nothing was repetitive. Every session was unique, and everyone covered each unique issues or the problems that our participants can take up for research. So I think we have been probably successful, and our hopefully participants would feel that the time they spent has added a lot of value to them. Okay? And so with this, again, I thank all of you, all the speakers, and so thank you so much. And again, the recordings are available on the YouTube channel, and please feel free to share it with your friends, colleagues, or students. So in future, based on the feedback, we may also think like how to organize such events in future. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we can. I will stop the recording now.
Thank you. Thank you all.